Under the scorching Arizona sun, a hardened rancher stumbles upon a young woman tied to a crude wooden frame in the middle of the desert. Barely alive, yet her eyes burn with something far more dangerous than fear. When he cuts her free, she strikes at him with lethal precision. Before either can decide if the other is enemy or ally, armed riders appear on the horizon, and a single choice pulls him into a war he never wanted. This is a story of survival, betrayal, and justice forged in fire. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The desert didn't forgive mistakes. Cole Tanner knew that better than most. 20 years working cattle in Arizona territory had taught him to read the land the way some men read scripture. Every shadow, every shift in the wind carried meaning. Which was why, 3 hours into his ride toward the trading post at Copper Wells, something felt wrong. He reined in his mare and stood in the stirrups, squinting against the glare. The sun sat high and merciless, turning the air into something you could almost see. Heat shimmers danced across the flats, making the horizon waver like a mirage. Nothing moved except the wind, pulling dust devils across the hardpan. But there, about a quarter mile out, something vertical broke the endless horizontal, something that shouldn't be there. Cole touched his heels to the mare's flanks and rode toward it, one hand resting on the Winchester across his saddle. As he drew closer, the shape resolved into a wooden frame, maybe 8 feet tall, 2 posts driven into the ground with a crossbeam lashed between them. Crude work. Hasty. And someone was tied to it. Cole's jaw tightened. He'd seen this before, years back. Apaches used frames like these for prisoners sometimes, though this didn't look like their work. Too sloppy. And Apaches didn't usually leave their captives this close to white settlements. He approached slowly, the mare's hooves crunching on rock and brittle bush. The figure was small, slumped forward against the ropes, long black hair hanging down to hide the face. A woman, he realized. Young, probably. She wore doeskin leggings and a torn cotton shirt, both crusted with dust and what might have been blood. Cole dismounted 10 feet out, rifle in hand. "You alive?" No response. The woman's head didn't move. He came closer, boots scraping sand, and that's when he saw her hands. The fingers were curled into the rope, not limp, holding on. And beneath the curtain of hair, one eye opened, dark, alert, tracking his every movement. "Easy," Cole said, lowering the rifle slightly. "I'm going to cut you down." He pulled his knife and moved to the ropes binding her wrists. The moment the blade touched the hemp, she exploded into multi-motion. Her freed hand shot out and grabbed his wrist with shocking strength, twisting it inward while her leg hooked behind his knee. Cole went down hard, the knife flying from his grip. She landed on top of him, one forearm pressed against his throat, her other hand reaching for the blade in the dirt. "Who sent you?" Her voice was hoarse, but sharp as broken glass. "Briggs? The colonel?" Cole couldn't answer with her arm crushing his windpipe. He bucked once, trying to throw her off, but she had leverage, and she knew how to use it. Black spots crept into his vision. "Not," he managed to choke out. "Nobody!" She pressed harder, her face inches from his. Up close he could see the bruises mottling her cheekbone, the split in her lower lip, the fever-bright intensity in her eyes. This woman was half-starved and probably concussed, but she fought like someone with everything to lose. "Liar," she hissed. Cole's hand found a rock. He didn't want to hurt her, but he didn't plan on dying in the dirt either. He swung it up toward her temple. Not hard enough to crack bone, just enough to stun. But she saw it coming and twisted away. The rock glanced off her shoulder instead. It bought him a second. He rolled, throwing her sideways, and scrambled to his knees. She came up at the same time, his knife now in her hand, body coiled and ready. "Listen to me," Cole said, breathing hard. "I don't know who Briggs is. I don't know what you're mixed up in. I saw you tied up and figured you needed help. That's all." "Help?" She spat the word like poison. "Nobody helps. Not out here." "Well, I was about to before you tried to choke me to death." They stared at each other across 6 feet of desert. Cole could see her weighing options, calculating odds. She was smart. He'd give her that. Smart enough to know she was in bad shape, and smart enough to know that if he'd wanted her dead, he could have shot her from 50 yards out instead of cutting her down. "You're alone?" she asked. "Do you see anyone else?" Her eyes flicked past him to the empty desert, then back. Could be more coming. Could be, Cole admitted, but there's not. She shifted her weight, still holding the knife ready. The men who did this? How long ago did they leave? How would I know? I just got here. Look at the tracks, old man. You know how to read sign or not? Old man. Cole was 43 and he'd been called worse. He moved slowly toward the frame, keeping his hands visible, and crouched to study the ground. The woman watched him like a hawk watching a snake. The dirt around the posts was scuffed and torn, but the wind had already started to blur the edges. Cole touched one boot print, feeling the crumbled edge. 3, maybe 4 hours, he said. 6 riders, I'd guess, headed northwest. 6. She closed her eyes briefly. They split up. That means the others went for reinforcements. Reinforcements for what? She didn't answer. Instead, she swayed slightly, catching herself with visible effort. The knife dipped. Cole stood. You need water. I need a horse and a head start. You need water first, or you won't make it half a mile. He walked back to his mare, moving deliberately, and pulled his canteen from the saddle. When he turned around, she'd shifted position to keep him in sight, but she was listing to one side now, the adrenaline clearly fading. He tossed the canteen. She caught it one-handed, a reflex that spoke of training, and stared at it like it might be a trick. It's just water, Cole said. She uncapped it and sniffed, then took a careful sip. Then another, longer one. She had enough self-control not to gulp it down, which meant she'd been in bad situations before. You learned rationing the hard way, or you didn't live long enough to learn it at all. What's your name? Cole asked. Does it matter? Probably not, but if we're going to stand here pointing weapons at each other, might as well be civilized about it. The corner of her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Kaya. Cole Tanner. Tanner. She lowered the knife slightly. You run cattle north of Copperwells? He felt something cold settle in his gut. How do you know that? I know a lot of things. Kaya took another drink, then capped the canteen and tossed it back. You lost your family 6 years ago. Raiders hit your ranch while you were in town, burned everything, killed your wife and both sons. Cole's hand dropped to the rifle before he could stop himself. Who the hell are you? Someone who pays attention. Her eyes were steady, unafraid. You've been alone since then. You work hard, keep to yourself, and you don't trust easy, which makes you either very careful or very broken. Maybe both. That doesn't answer my question. No, Kaya agreed. It doesn't. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of creosote and hot stone. Cole's mare stamped and blew, nervous about something. He'd learned to trust the horse's instincts. She was rarely wrong. We should move, Kaya said, her gaze shifting to the northern horizon. They'll send scouts back to check if I'm still here. The men who did this to you? Yes. And they are? Soldiers, or men pretending to be soldiers. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. She started walking toward his horse, still holding his knife. I need to borrow this. Like hell you do. She stopped and turned. For the first time, something like exhaustion showed through the armor. Listen, Tanner, I don't have time to explain, and you don't have time to hear it. Those riders are going to come back, and when they do, anyone near me is going to die. So you can either lend me your horse and walk back to town, or you can ride off now and pretend you never saw me. Either way, you need to leave. Or you're going to get pulled into something that's not your fight. Cole looked at her, this skinny, battered woman with blood on her clothes and fire in her eyes, and he thought about the ranch house 6 years gone, the graves he'd dug with his own hands, the empty years since. He thought about riding back to Copperwells, drinking rot-gut whiskey in the saloon, and waking up tomorrow to do the same damn thing he'd done yesterday. Maybe I'm tired of things not being my fight, he said. Kaya stared at him. You don't know what you're saying. Probably not. He walked to the mare and pulled the rifle from its scabbard, then checked the load. 16 rounds in the tube, 1 in the chamber. He had another box of ammunition in his saddlebag. But I know what happens to people left alone in the desert, and I've got no stomach for it anymore. So if someone's hunting you, they're going to have to go through me first. You're insane. That's been suggested before. Cole swung into the saddle and offered his hand. You coming or not? She looked at his hand like it was a coiled rattlesnake. Then she looked at the horizon, where a thin plume of dust was beginning to rise in the distance. Damn, she breathed. Cole followed her gaze. The dust was moving fast, spreading wider. More than 6 riders this time. A lot more. Now or never, he said. Kaya grabbed his hand and swung up behind him, settling into place with practiced ease. She still had his knife, he noticed. Well, that was a problem for later. North, she said against his ear. The canyon lands. We can lose them there. Cole kicked the mare into a run, and the desert exploded behind them. The first shots came about 2 minutes later, high and wide, meant to pin them down more than kill. Cole kept the mare running, angling toward a line of low bluffs that marked the edge of the Badlands. The terrain here was treacherous, all broken rock and hidden arroyos, but it was also maze-like. If they could make it to the canyons, they had a chance. How many? He shouted over the wind. 20, maybe more, Kaya called back. Briggs doesn't do anything small. This Briggs, he military? Was. Now he's something worse. Another shot cracked past, closer this time. Cole leaned low over the mare's neck, feeling Kaya press against his back. She was light, but the horse was already breathing hard. They couldn't outrun 20 men forever. There, Kaya pointed ahead to where the bluff split into a narrow defile. That gap, it opens into the Red Rock country. Cole aimed for it, the mare's hooves striking sparks off stone as they hit the rocky ground. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew louder. Hoofbeats, shouts, the jingle of tack and weapons. Professional riders moving in formation. They plunged into the gap just as a volley of rifle fire tore up the ground where they'd been seconds before. The walls rose steep on either side, red sandstone banded with white, and the path twisted like a snake. Cole had to slow the mare to navigate the turns, trusting her footing on the loose scree. Keep going, Kaya urged. It widens about a quarter mile up. And then? Then we have choices. The defile opened suddenly into a broader canyon, the floor scattered with juniper and sage. Cole pulled up, the mare heaving beneath him, and looked back. No one had followed them through yet, but it was only a matter of time. Kaya slid down and stumbled, catching herself on a boulder. She was in worse shape than she'd let on, probably a mild concussion at minimum, maybe cracked ribs from the look of how she held herself. Can you shoot? Cole asked, dismounting. Yes. Here. He pulled his old Colt from his belt and handed it to her, along with a handful of cartridges. 6 in the cylinder, these for reload. You know how to use it? She checked the action with quick, efficient movements. I know. Cole moved to the canyon mouth and found a position behind a fallen slab of sandstone. From here, he had a clear view of the defile and anyone trying to come through it. Kaya took up position on the opposite side, 20 feet away. When they come, Cole said, aim low. First shot won't kill, but it'll drop them. Horses won't want to step over a body in that narrow space. It'll jam them up. Kaya looked at him with something new in her expression. You've done this before. Different war. Same principles. They didn't have to wait long. The first rider came through at a cautious trot, rifle up and ready. Cole let him get 10 feet into the canyon before he fired. The Winchester barked once, and the man went down clutching his thigh. His horse screamed and bolted sideways, crashing into the canyon wall. Chaos erupted in the defile. Men shouted, horses panicked, and the narrow space became a churning mess of confusion. 2 more riders tried to push through. Kaya dropped one with a shot to the shoulder, and Cole took the other's horse out from under him with a leg shot. Not something he liked doing, but survival didn't care about preferences. The pursuit pulled back and silence fell. They'll try to flank us, Kaya said, already moving. There's another way into this canyon from the west. How do you know? I grew up here. She was running now, limping but fast, and Cole had no choice but to follow. They left the mare ground-tied and scrambled up a scree slope to a ledge that ran along the canyon rim. Below, the riders were regrouping. Cole counted 18 men, all armed with repeating rifles, all wearing a mix of cavalry blues and civilian clothes. At the front of the group, a tall man with silver hair and a colonel's insignia on his hat was giving orders. Even from a distance, Cole could see the cold efficiency in how he moved. That's Briggs, Kaya whispered. He doesn't look like a raider. He's not. He's worse. She pointed to the west, where another group of riders was indeed working their way along the rim. See? Told you. Cole studied the terrain. They were pinned, pursuit behind, flankers moving to cut them off, and nowhere to run but deeper into the Badlands. The smart play was to surrender, except something told him that surrendering to Colonel Briggs was the same as dying, just slower. What did you do to make him this angry? Cole asked. Kaya smiled, and it wasn't a nice expression. I found out what he's really doing out here. Which is? Starting a war. Before Cole could respond, gunfire erupted from the west. The flankers had spotted them. Bullets whined off the rocks, sending stone chips flying. Cole returned fire, driving them back into cover, but it was a temporary measure at best. We need to move, he said. Now! They ran along the ledge, staying low as the canyon erupted into a crossfire behind them. The ledge narrowed to barely a foot wide in places, with a 30-foot drop on one side and sheer wall on the other. Kaya moved across it like she'd done it 100 times. Cole followed more carefully, the Winchester slung across his back, trying not to look down. The ledge ended at a crack in the canyon wall, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Kaya didn't hesitate. She turned sideways and pushed into the gap, disappearing into shadow. Cole followed, the rock pressing against his chest and back, making it hard to breathe. They emerged into a hidden side canyon, this one smaller and choked with brush. A seep spring created a tiny pool of water at the base of the cliff, surrounded by maidenhair ferns and moss. It was beautiful and utterly defensible, which was probably why Kaya had led them here. We can hold this, she said, breathing hard. The gap's too narrow for more than one person at a time. Cole checked his ammunition, 11 rounds left in the Winchester, maybe 40 in his belt. Kaya had 4 left in the Colt. Not great odds if Briggs decided to wait them out. How long before they find the entrance? He asked. Depends how well they know the country. Could be minutes, could be hours. She sat down heavily next to the spring and cupped water to her mouth, then splashed some on her face. The bruises looked worse in the shade, purple and yellow, spreading across her cheekbone and down her jaw. Cole sat across from her, rifle across his knees. You want to tell me what this is really about? Kaya was quiet for a long moment, staring at the water. You ever hear of the Chiricahua silver? Rumors. Supposed to be a vein somewhere in these mountains, worth a fortune. Most people think it's a myth. It's not. She looked up at him. My father's people have known about it for generations. It's on tribal land, deep in territory that was promised to us by treaty. For years, we kept it secret because we knew what would happen if word got out. Let me guess. Word got out. Briggs found out 6 months ago. He came to my father pretending to be an honest officer, offering protection from raiders and settlers. What he really wanted was access to the silver. When my father refused, Briggs started planning something bigger. Cole felt the pieces starting to fit together, and he didn't like the picture they made. A war. He's been arming both sides, giving rifles to the worst elements in the tribes, staging raids on white settlements and blaming us, then using those raids to justify military action. He's got weapons stockpiled in 3 different locations, ready to hand out to anyone willing to fight. Once enough blood's been spilled, he'll step in as the peacemaker, negotiate a new treaty that strips the tribes of their land and take the silver for himself. That's insane. That's profitable. The silver alone is worth millions, but that's not even the worst part. Kaya leaned forward. He's got support from people in Washington. Senators, bureaucrats, maybe even the War Department. This isn't just one man's greed. It's a conspiracy that goes all the way to the top. Cole processed that, feeling the weight of it settle on him like a stone. He'd thought he was just helping a woman in trouble. Instead, he'd walked into something that could reshape the entire territory. And you? He asked. How do you fit into this? My father sent me to gather proof. I've been moving between the settlements and the tribes for months, documenting everything. The weapons shipments, the false flag raids, the names of everyone involved. I got close to Briggs's operation, close enough to find his supply depot. She touched her ribs gingerly. That's when they caught me. They would have killed me, but Briggs wanted information first. He's paranoid about who else knows, who I might have told. Did you tell anyone? One person. A friend in Tucson who works for the territorial newspaper. If I don't make contact in the next 3 days, he's supposed to publish everything I sent him." She smiled grimly. "That's why Briggs is so desperate to find me. If that story runs, his whole plan collapses." Cole stood and moved to the gap, peering out. He could hear voices in the main canyon now, spread out and searching. They had maybe an hour before someone found the crack in the wall. "So what's your play?" he asked, turning back. "I need to get to Tucson. Warn my contact, make sure the story runs. After that," she shrugged, "hope the law actually does something about it. That's a 2-day ride, minimum. And Briggs has men everywhere." "I know. You'll never make it alone." "I know that too." Kaya met his eyes. "Which is why I'm asking for your help." Cole should have said no. Should have found a way to slip out of this canyon, get back to his ranch, and let the world handle its own problems. He'd done his part already. He'd saved her from dying in the desert. That should have been enough. But he kept thinking about that colonel with the silver hair, orchestrating massacres and calling it strategy. He thought about families like his own, caught in the middle of someone else's war. He thought about the weight of his rifle and how long it had been since he'd pointed it at something that mattered. 3 days, he said finally. "We've got 3 days to get you to Tucson and stop whatever Briggs is planning." "We?" "You asked for help. I'm giving it." Kaya studied him with those dark, measuring eyes. "Why?" "Because 6 years ago, raiders killed my family while I was buying supplies in town. I spent years trying to find out who did it, but the trail went cold. Maybe they were just outlaws, or maybe—" He paused. "Maybe someone like Briggs armed them and pointed them at my ranch because I had land he wanted. Either way, I'm tired of watching other people start fires and walking away clean. Revenge is a bad reason to do anything." "Good thing that's not my reason." Cole checked the Winchester's action. "I'm doing it because it's right. The revenge is just a bonus." For the first time since he'd cut her down, Kaya smiled, a real one, small but genuine. "You're either the bravest man I've met or the dumbest." "Probably both." They spent the next hour preparing. Cole rationed out the rest of his water and the jerky in his saddlebag. Kaya used the time to clean her wounds as best she could, hissing through her teeth when she touched the gash along her hairline. Cole offered to help, but she waved him off. "I've had worse," she said. "I don't doubt it." Outside, the search continued. Twice, soldiers passed within 20 feet of the gap, but the angle in the shadows kept them hidden. Cole watched through a crack in the rock, counting men and noting their patterns. Briggs was methodical, dividing his force into search teams and sweep patterns. Professional work. As the sun began its slide toward the western horizon, painting the canyon walls in shades of amber and rust, Kaya moved up beside Cole. "They'll pull back soon," she said quietly. "Set a perimeter for the night and resume searching at dawn. That's when we move." "Your mare's still in the main canyon. They'll have found her by now." "Then we walk." Cole didn't love that answer, but he didn't have a better one. They settled in to wait, taking turns keeping watch while the other rested. Cole took the first shift, his back against the cool stone, rifle across his lap. As darkness fell, he found himself watching Kaya sleep. She'd curled up near the spring, using her arm as a pillow, and even in sleep her face held a wariness that spoke of hard experience. She couldn't have been more than 25, maybe younger, but she moved and thought like someone who'd already lived several lifetimes. What kind of father sent his daughter into something like this? Then again, what kind of daughter volunteered? The moon rose, 3/4 full, and bright enough to cast shadows. Cole could hear the soldiers settling in for the night. Low voices, the clink of metal on metal, someone singing off-key in Spanish. Normal sounds, the kind you'd hear around any army camp. It was easy to forget these men were hunting them like animals. Around midnight, Kaya stirred and sat up, instantly alert. "Your turn," Cole said quietly. She nodded and moved to the gap while Cole stretched out on the ground. He didn't think he'd sleep, but exhaustion pulled him under faster than expected. He dreamed of fire and smoke, of his sons calling for him while raiders laughed in the darkness. He dreamed of the ranch house burning, collapsing in on itself while he stood frozen and useless. He dreamed of graves he'd dug in hard ground and the silence that followed. He woke to Kaya shaking his shoulder, the eastern sky just beginning to gray with false dawn. "Time to move," she whispered. They drank the last of the water and gathered their meager supplies. Cole had 11 rounds left in the Winchester, Kaya had 3 in the Colt. If it came to a fight, it would be a short one. They slipped through the gap single file, emerging into the main canyon as the world held its breath between night and day. The soldiers' camp was spread out below them, maybe 60 yards away. Bedrolls, a cold fire, sentries posted at intervals. Kaya led them up instead of down, climbing the scree slope to the canyon rim with quick, quiet movements. They were halfway up when a stone shifted under Cole's boot. It wasn't loud, just a soft click and rattle, but in the pre-dawn stillness it might as well have been a gunshot. Below, a sentry's head snapped around. "There!" The camp erupted. Men rolled out of bedrolls, grabbing weapons, and the quiet morning exploded into shouts and gunfire. Cole and Kaya ran, scrambling up the last stretch of slope as bullets kicked up dirt around them. They crested the rim just as the sun broke the horizon, flooding the Badlands with sudden, blinding light. Before them stretched miles of broken country, mesas and buttes, an endless maze of stone, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Behind them, soldiers were already climbing the slope. Kaya grabbed Cole's hand and pulled him into a run, heading east toward the rising sun. They had no water, almost no ammunition, and 20 armed men on their trail. But they were alive, and the truth was still worth fighting for. The desert had swallowed worse gamblers than them. They ran until Cole's lungs felt like they were tearing apart, until the sun climbed high enough to turn the air into something solid and punishing. Kaya moved ahead of him with the kind of endurance that came from growing up in this country, her feet finding purchase on loose rock where his boots slipped and scattered stones. Behind them, the voices of pursuit had faded but not disappeared. Briggs wasn't the type to give up easy. Cole's canteen had been left with the mare, which meant they had nothing. No water, no food beyond the few strips of jerky he'd stuffed in his pocket during the night. The Badlands stretched in every direction, red rock and white sand and skeletal juniper trees that offered no shade worth mentioning. Around mid-morning, Kaya finally stopped at the edge of a shallow wash and dropped to her knees, breathing hard. Sweat had soaked through her shirt, and when she pushed the hair back from her face, Cole could see the exhaustion starting to win. "We can't keep this pace," he said, though his own body was screaming the same thing. "We don't have a choice." But even as she said it, she swayed slightly. Cole grabbed her arm to steady her. "When's the last time you ate?" "2 days ago. Maybe 3. She pulled away from his grip, pride keeping her upright. "I'm fine. You're about 10 minutes from collapsing. Then I'll collapse moving forward." Stubborn. Cole respected that, even if it was going to get them both killed. He pulled out the jerky and broke off half, holding it out to her. "Eat this." Kaya looked at the dried meat like it was gold. "That's yours." "It's ours now, and you need it more than I do." She took it after a moment's hesitation and bit off a small piece, chewing slowly to make it last. Cole ate his own portion and tried not to think about how little it was, how far they still had to go. 2 days to Tucson on horseback. On foot, in this heat, with no water. 4 days if they were lucky, 5 if they weren't. They might not make it at all. "There's a place," Kaya said between bites, "about 6 miles northeast of here. Old Pueblo ruins. There's usually water in the cistern, if the rains have been good." "Have they been good?" "Not really." She smiled without humor. "But it's better than dying of thirst out here." Cole looked back the way they'd come. No dust plumes yet, but that didn't mean much. Briggs could be tracking them right now, staying low and quiet. 6 miles. Can you make it?" "Can you?" Fair question. Cole was 20 years older and carrying an extra 30 pounds he didn't need. But he'd spent 2 decades working cattle in country that tried to kill you if you got soft. And he'd learned to push through pain a long time ago. "Let's find out," he said. They moved northeast, staying in the washes when they could to avoid showing themselves on the skyline. The sun climbed higher, and the heat became something alive and malicious. Cole's shirt stuck to his back, and his throat felt like someone had lined it with sandpaper. Every breath pulled in air so dry it hurt. Kaya stumbled twice in the first hour. The second time, she went down hard on one knee and stayed there, head hanging. Cole helped her up. "Talk to me. Keep your mind working." "About what?" Anything. Your father, your people. I don't care. She was quiet for a few steps, then started talking in a voice that sounded far away. My mother was white, a teacher from Massachusetts who came west thinking she'd civilize the savages. She met my father at a trading post and decided maybe the savages had things worth learning instead. A pause. They had 3 years together before she got sick, pneumonia. There was no doctor, no medicine. She died in the winter, and my father buried her in the hills where the sunrise hits first. Cole didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. He raised me between two worlds, Kaya continued, taught me to track and hunt and survive, but also to read and write and understand how white people think. He said I'd need both to protect our people when he was gone. She wiped sweat from her eyes. I think he knew something like this was coming. He just didn't know how big it would be. How big is it? Bigger than Briggs. The colonel's just the knife. There are hands behind him, pushing. People in Washington who see this territory as empty land waiting to be carved up and sold. They don't care how many bodies it takes to clear it. They climbed out of a wash and crossed a flat expanse of caliche that reflected the sun like a mirror. Cole's eyes watered from the glare. He thought about the ranch he'd built, the life he'd tried to make, and how easily it had all burned. Maybe Kaya was right. Maybe men like Briggs were everywhere, just waiting for their chance. Your father, Cole said. Where is he now? With the tribe, in the winter camp. It's hidden deep in the Chiricahuas, a place we've used for generations. He doesn't know what happened to me yet. Won't know until I don't come back. And if you don't? What then? Kaya was quiet for a long moment. Then he'll do what he thinks is right, probably gather the warriors and hit back hard, which is exactly what Briggs wants. The more violence there is, the easier it is to justify taking everything. Cole understood the trap. Damned if you fought, damned if you didn't. He'd seen it before, just on a smaller scale. Men with power didn't need to win fair. They just needed you to lose. The ruins appeared around noon, rising out of the desert like broken teeth. Ancient walls of stacked stone, most of them collapsed, surrounded by pottery shards and the ghosts of people who'd lived here centuries ago. In the center of the settlement, a circular depression marked where the cistern had been dug. Kaya half ran, half stumbled to it, and dropped to her knees at the edge. Cole came up behind her and looked down into shadow. At the bottom, maybe 12 feet down, he could see the dark gleam of water. How much? He asked. Enough, maybe. Kaya was already untying the rawhide cord she wore as a belt. She pulled off her shirt, wearing a thin cotton undershirt beneath, and began knotting the shirt into a makeshift rope. There should be handholds cut into the wall. I'll climb down. You can barely stand. I've done this before. Cole watched her tie off the shirt rope to a piece of rebar sticking out of the stonework, then swing her legs over the edge of the cistern. She found the first handhold and started down, moving carefully in the dim light. Halfway down, her foot slipped. She caught herself with her hands, breathing hard, and Cole's heart kicked against his ribs. You all right? Fantastic. But her voice was tight with pain. She made it to the bottom and knelt by the water. Even from above, Cole could hear her drinking in long, desperate gulps. After a moment, she called up. It's good. A little silty, but good. Fill the shirt. We'll pull it up. It took 3 trips to get enough water for both of them and to soak the shirt thoroughly. Cole pulled Kaya up last, and she emerged pale and shaking, but alive. They sat in the shade of the tallest remaining wall and passed the wet shirt back and forth, wringing water into their mouths and onto their faces and necks. Cole had never tasted anything better. We should rest here, Kaya said, after they'd both drunk their fill. Wait for dark, then keep moving. Briggs will catch up. Maybe, but we won't make it to Tucson if we die of heat stroke first. She had a point. Cole leaned back against the sun-warmed stone and closed his eyes, the rifle across his lap. He could hear Kaya's breathing beside him, rough and uneven. They were both running on fumes, and the hardest part was still ahead. He must have dozed off, because when he opened his eyes again, the sun had shifted, and Kaya was standing at the gap in the wall, looking out at the desert. She'd put her shirt back on, still damp, and her hair was loose around her shoulders. What is it? Cole asked, coming alert. Dust. 2 miles out, maybe less. Cole moved beside her and squinted against the glare. There. a thin line of dust moving northeast parallel to their position, not directly toward them, but close enough to be trouble. "Could be travelers," he said without much hope. "Could be." Kaya's hand rested on the Colt at her belt. "Want to bet your life on it?" They gathered what little they had and moved deeper into the ruins, finding a spot where the walls formed a narrow alcove with good sight lines. Cole checked the Winchester. Still 11 rounds. He'd have to make everyone count. The riders appeared 20 minutes later, 3 men on horseback, moving slow and methodical, reading the ground. They wore cavalry blues mixed with civilian gear, and even at a distance Cole could see the professional way they spread out to cover ground. Scouts. Briggs had sent his best trackers ahead. "They'll see our footprints at the cistern," Kaya whispered. "I know." "So we fight or run?" Cole watched the riders approach, calculating angles and odds, 3 against 2, and the 2 were half dead from heat and exhaustion. Not great numbers, but running meant they'd be spotted for sure, and then the whole pack would come down on them. "We fight," he said. "Quiet if we can. Loud if we can't." They split up, Cole taking position behind a collapsed wall to the east, Kaya circling around to the west. The scouts reached the ruins and dismounted, ground-tying their horses. Smart men would have left one to watch the animals, but these 3 moved together toward the cistern. Arrogant. That might be the edge Cole needed. He waited until they were all clustered around the water, their attention down, their rifles slung. Then he stepped out from behind the wall, the Winchester leveled. "That's far enough." The 3 men froze. The nearest one, young, maybe 20, with a thin mustache, started to reach for his rifle. "Don't," Cole said quietly. "I'd rather not kill you, but I will." "Easy, friend." The man in the middle was older, with sergeant stripes on his sleeve and calculating eyes. "We're just looking for water, same as you." "You're looking for us." "Well," the sergeant smiled. "That too." Kaya appeared from the other side, the Colt held steady in both hands. "Drop the gun belts, slow." The young one looked like he wanted to try something stupid, but the sergeant put a hand on his arm. "Do what the lady says." They unbuckled their gun belts and let them fall. The third man, older and weathered, spat tobacco juice. "Briggs is going to skin you both when he catches up." "Maybe he catches up," Kaya said. "Maybe he doesn't." "Oh, he will." The sergeant's smile didn't waver. "He's got 30 men spread across these badlands now. You can't run forever." "Don't need forever," Cole said. "Just need 3 days." The sergeant's eyes flickered with something, recognition, maybe concern. 3 days. That when your newspaper friend goes public? So Briggs had figured that out too. Or maybe tortured it out of someone. Either way, the timeline was known. Kaya's jaw tightened. "Step away from the guns." They did, moving back with their hands visible. Cole kept the rifle on them while Kaya gathered up the gun belts and tossed them into the cistern. The young one flinched at the splash. "That was Army property," he said. "Send Briggs the bill." The sergeant was still smiling, but his eyes had gone cold. "You know you're dead, right? Even if you make it to Tucson, even if the story runs, you think the Army's going to let a half-breed and a broken-down rancher embarrass them? You'll disappear, and nobody will ask questions." Cole took a step closer, letting the rifle barrel drop to center on the man's chest. "You talk too much." "Just stating facts." "Here's a fact for you. 6 years ago, raiders hit my ranch, killed my family, burned everything I had. I spent years trying to find out who sent them, and I never did. But now I'm thinking maybe it wasn't random. Maybe someone wanted my land for the same reason Briggs wants tribal land now." He paused. "So when you see the colonel, tell him I'm done running from men who hide behind uniforms and call it duty. Tell him I'm coming for him, and I don't care how many of you I have to go through." The sergeant's smile finally faded. "You're insane." "That's the second time someone's told me that this week." Cole gestured with the rifle. "Start walking. South. Don't look back." "Our horses are ours now. Walk!" The 3 men exchanged glances, then started walking. The young one kept looking back until Kaya fired a shot into the dirt behind him. After that, they kept their eyes forward. Cole and Kaya waited until they were out of sight, then moved quickly to the horses. The animals were cavalry stock, well-trained and well-fed. Cole took the bay, Kaya the smaller roan. They found canteens, ammunition, and dried rations in the saddlebags, enough to make the difference between dying and surviving. "We need to move fast," Kaya said, already mounting. "They'll bring the whole force down on us now." Cole swung into the saddle, and the bay danced beneath him, eager to run. For the first time in 2 days, he felt something like hope. They had water, horses, and a chance. They rode hard northeast, pushing the horses but not breaking them, putting miles between themselves and the ruins. The land began to change, the red rock giving way to grassland dotted with mesquite and prickly pear. Signs of civilization started to appear: fence lines, old wagon ruts, the distant shape of a windmill. As the sun dropped toward the western horizon, Kaya pointed ahead to a line of cottonwoods. "Creek bed, we can rest the horses there." They found water running shallow but clean, and the horses drank gratefully. Cole refilled the canteens while Kaya kept watch, her eyes scanning the empty country behind them. "No dust," she said after a while. "They're either being careful or we lost them." "Briggs doesn't seem like the type to lose people." "No." She sat down on a flat rock and pulled off her boots, checking her feet for blisters. "He's got another play. Just don't know what it is yet." Cole sat nearby and divided up the rations: hardtack, salted pork, coffee grounds. A feast compared to what they'd been surviving on. They ate in silence, too tired for conversation, while the light faded and the first stars appeared. "We should take turns sleeping," Cole said. 4 hours each. I'll take first watch." "Wake me if anything moves." Kaya stretched out on the ground, using her saddle as a pillow, and was asleep in seconds. Cole envied that ability. He'd never been able to just shut off, even when he was exhausted. His mind kept working, chewing on problems like a dog with a bone. He thought about what the sergeant had said, about being dead men walking, about disappearing. The man was probably right. Even if they exposed Briggs, even if the conspiracy collapsed, there would be consequences. People that powerful didn't lose without making sure everyone involved paid the price. But then he thought about Kaya's father, about the tribe waiting in the mountains for a war they didn't start. He thought about families like his, caught in the machinery of other men's ambitions. And he thought about the rifle in his hands, and the choice he'd made to use it for something that mattered. Maybe dying for something was better than living for nothing. The moon rose full and bright, turning the desert silver. Cole heard coyotes singing in the distance, and once an owl passed overhead on silent wings. Normal sounds. Peaceful, even. He almost missed the other sound, soft and rhythmic, coming from the south. Hoofbeats, moving slow and careful. Cole moved to Kaya and put a hand over her mouth. She woke instantly, eyes wide, and he pointed south. She heard it too. They gathered their gear in silence and led the horses deeper into the cottonwoods, finding a spot where the shadows were thickest. The riders appeared a few minutes later, 5 of them, moving in a loose line along the creek. They stopped at the water to let their horses drink, and Cole got a good look at them in the moonlight. Not soldiers. These men wore range clothes, gun belts slung low, and they had the hard look of men who hired out for violence. Briggs must have brought in reinforcements, the kind who didn't wear uniforms and didn't ask questions. "Tracks say they stopped here," one of them said, his voice carrying in the still air. "Can't be more than an hour ahead. We push through the night, we'll catch them by dawn." This from a tall man with a scarred face. "Briggs is paying double if we bring them in alive." "What if they don't want to come alive?" "Then we bring them in dead." He said either way works. They remounted and rode on, following the creek northeast. Cole waited until they were out of earshot before he let out the breath he'd been holding. "Hired guns," Kaya whispered. "That's new?" "Means Briggs is worried. He's pulling in everyone he can. Or it means he's got more resources than we thought." She checked the loads in her Colt. "Either way, we can't stay ahead of them for long. Not with this many people looking." Cole thought about the map in his head, the country between here and Tucson. 2 more days of riding through open land where they'd be visible for miles. Against trained soldiers and hired killers who knew this territory just as well as they did. "We need to change the game," he said. "How?" "Stop running. Start hunting." Kaya looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "There's 5 of them and 2 of us." "Now there is. But if we can pick them off 1 or 2 at a time, even the odds." He trailed off, working through the possibilities. They're following our trail, expecting us to keep running northeast. What if we double back, set up an ambush? That's insane. You keep saying that, because you keep suggesting insane things. But she was thinking about it. He could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. We'd need terrain that forces them into a bottleneck, somewhere we can shoot from cover. There's a canyon about 3 miles east of here. Granite walls, narrow floor. My father used to drive cattle through it when I was a kid. Cole felt something cold in his chest. Your father brought cattle through here? This whole area used to be shared grazing land before the treaties got rewritten. My people and the ranchers, we traded, worked together sometimes. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't war either. She stood and started saddling her horse. The canyon's called Needle Gap. If we can get there before they do, we can hold it. Maybe. They rode east, staying off the main trail, using washes and low ground to hide their movement. The moon gave them enough light to navigate, but it also meant anyone looking could see them. Cole kept checking their back trail, expecting to see riders appearing at any moment. The canyon materialized out of the darkness like a knife wound in the earth, sheer walls of pale granite rising 60 feet on either side, with a floor maybe 20 feet wide. Perfect killing ground, if you were on the high side. Death trap if you weren't. Kaya pointed to a narrow game trail that zigzagged up the west wall. We can get the horses up there, find positions on the rim. It took them 30 minutes of careful work to get the horses up the trail and hidden in a cleft behind the ridgeline. Then they moved into position, Cole on the north end of the canyon with a clear view of the entrance, Kaya on the south watching the exit. They settled in to wait. Cole laid out his ammunition, 11 rounds for the Winchester, plus 20 more from the saddlebags they'd taken. 31 shots total. Against 5 men, that should be enough. If he didn't miss, if his nerve held, if luck was on their side. A lot of ifs. The eastern sky was just beginning to gray when he heard them coming. The hired guns rode into the canyon in single file, following the tracks that Cole and Kaya had deliberately left obvious. They were talking among themselves, not bothering to keep quiet, confident in their numbers. Cole sighted down the Winchester, tracking the lead rider. His finger rested on the trigger, and he realized his hands were steady. No shaking, no hesitation. Somewhere in the last 2 days, he'd crossed a line he didn't even know was there. He waited until all 5 were in the canyon, boxed in with nowhere to run. Then he fired. The lead rider went down clutching his shoulder and chaos erupted below. Horses reared and screamed, men shouted and grabbed for rifles. Kaya opened up from the other end, her shots precise and controlled, dropping another man from his saddle. The remaining 3 scattered, looking for cover that didn't exist. One made it to the canyon wall and pressed against it, trying to make himself small. Another wheeled his horse and tried to run back the way they'd come. The third just froze, caught between fight and flight. Cole put a round into the frozen man's leg, and he toppled sideways. Kaya shot the runner's horse out from under him, sending both crashing to the ground. That left one. The man pressed against the wall, who'd drawn his pistol and was firing blind up at the rim. His bullet sparked off granite 10 feet from Cole's position. Not even close. But the man kept firing, emptying his cylinder, then fumbling to reload with shaking hands. "Drop it," Cole called down. The man looked up, his face white in the dawn light. "Go to hell." "Your choice." Cole fired once more, and the man's pistol went spinning from his hand, broken. He slumped against the wall, cradling his shattered fingers, and the fight went out of him. Below, 3 men were down injured. One was trapped under his dead horse, and one was standing with his hands raised. Not bad for 30 seconds of work. Cole and Kaya made their way down to the canyon floor, rifles ready. The man trapped under his horse was groaning, trying to pull his leg free. The one Cole had shot in the shoulder was sitting up, pressing his neckerchief against the wound. The others were in various states of pain and surrender. "You had a choice," Cole said, looking at them. "Could have stayed out of this. Could have told Briggs no." "Briggs pays better than most," the man with the raised hand said. He was the scarred one who'd talked about bringing them in alive. "Nothing personal." "Everything's personal." Kaya moved through them, collecting weapons and tossing them aside. "How many more did he hire?" "Couple dozen, maybe. Hard to say. He's got men coming in from 3 territories." "Where's his main camp?" The scarred man smiled through blood. "You really think I'm going to tell you that?" Kaya pressed the Colt against his temple. I really think you are. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the scarred man's smile faded. 20 miles west of here. Old mining camp called Silver Creek. He's got maybe 40 men there, plus whatever gear he's been stockpiling. The weapons cache, Cole said. Among other things. Ammunition, dynamite, enough firepower to start a real war. The man spat blood. You're fools if you think you can stop him. This thing's too big. Goes too high up. We'll see about that. Kaya lowered the gun. How long before Briggs realizes you're not coming back? We were supposed to report in at noon. When we don't, he'll send more. Cole looked at the sun, now fully above the horizon. That gave them maybe 5 hours before the next wave came looking. Not enough time to reach Tucson, but maybe enough time to do something else. He turned to Kaya. The weapons cache. If we destroy it, we cut off his supply line. No guns to hand out, no way to start his war. Well, we'd have to get past 40 armed men. Not if they're out looking for us. Understanding dawned in her eyes. We keep running, keep them chasing, lead them away from the camp, then double back and hit it while it's empty. It's risky. Everything about this is risky. She was already moving toward the horses. But if we pull it off, we don't just save my people, we end this whole thing. Cole looked back at the hired guns, injured and disarmed, and probably reconsidering their life choices. You boys should head back to wherever you came from. Tell Briggs we're done running. Tell him we're coming for everything he's built. The scarred man laughed, the sound wet and pained. You're both dead. You just don't know it yet. Maybe, Cole said, but we're taking him with us. They left the hired guns with one horse between them and their injured, then rode hard to the northeast, making sure to leave a trail obvious enough for a blind man to follow. By mid-morning, they could see the dust of pursuit rising behind them, multiple groups converging from different directions, all following the tracks Cole and Kaya were deliberately leaving. Perfect. They led the chase in a wide arc, gradually circling back toward the west. It was brutal riding, pushing the horses to their limits, stopping only when necessary to keep the pursuit close enough to stay interested, but far enough not to catch them. As the sun began its descent toward evening, they crested a ridge and looked down into a shallow valley. Below, nestled against a hillside, Cole could see the remains of Silver Creek, a dozen buildings in various states of collapse, and one large structure that looked newer. Canvas tents dotted the ground around it, and even from a distance, he could see men moving between them. But not many men, maybe 8 or 10, left behind to guard the camp. The rest are out chasing us, Kaya said, satisfaction in her voice. Then let's not waste the opportunity. They left the horses tied in a draw and moved in on foot as darkness fell, using the broken landscape for cover. The camp had sentries posted, but they were lazy, more interested in their card game than actually watching. Men who thought they were safe. Cole and Kaya split up, circling around to approach the main building from different angles. Cole could see crates stacked inside through the open door, rifles, ammunition boxes, the tools of manufactured war, enough to arm 100 men and send them killing. He waited until Kaya was in position, then stepped out of the shadows with his rifle raised. Nobody move. The sentries went for their guns anyway. They always did. Cole shot one in the leg, and Kaya dropped another with a shoulder shot, and suddenly the camp was in chaos. Men poured out of tents, some armed, some not, all confused and disoriented in the darkness. "The building!" Cole shouted to Kaya. "Set it burning!" She ran for the structure while Cole laid down covering fire, keeping the guards pinned. She disappeared inside, and a moment later, orange light flickered through the windows. She'd found lamp oil or something equally flammable. The guards tried to rush the building, but Cole drove them back with precise shots that kicked up dirt at their feet. One man got brave and charged anyway. Cole put him down with a round through the thigh. Kaya emerged from the building at a dead run, flames already licking up the walls behind her. She'd grabbed 2 rifles on her way out, and she tossed one to Cole as she passed. They ran for the horses while the camp erupted behind them, men shouting, trying to organize bucket lines, trying to save the weapons cache even as it went up in flames bright enough to see for miles. By the time they reached the horses and mounted up, the entire building was an inferno. Ammunition started cooking off inside, sounding like fireworks, and the guards gave up trying to save it. They just stood and watched everything burn. Cole and Kaya didn't stop riding until they were 5 miles away, and the orange glow had faded behind them. Only then did they pull up, both breathing hard, both streaked with smoke and sweat. "We did it," Kaya said, something like wonder in her voice. "We actually did it." Cole looked back toward the distant fire. They'd destroyed Briggs' weapons, yes, but they'd also just announced exactly where they were to every man hunting them. Come morning, the whole force would converge on Silver Creek, and they'd find tracks leading northeast, straight toward Tucson. "We bought time," Cole said. "Now we have to use it." They rode through the night, stopping only to rest the horses when absolutely necessary. The country gradually changed around them, the raw desert giving way to grassland and scattered ranches. Signs of civilization, of the world beyond the Badlands where men like Briggs made their plans. As dawn broke on their third day of running, Cole could see the shape of Tucson rising in the distance, adobe buildings and church spires, and the promise of law, if law still meant anything. They were going to make it. Against all odds, against Briggs and his hired guns and the desert itself, they were going to deliver the truth. But as they rode closer, Cole felt the weight of what came next settling on him like stone. The truth was one thing, justice was another. And men who built empires on lies didn't go down easy. Behind them, somewhere in the desert, Briggs was coming, and he was bringing everything he had. The territorial newspaper office sat on the corner of Congress and Stone, a two-story adobe building that looked like it had been built during the Spanish colonial days and patched together ever since. Cole and Kaya hitched their exhausted horses outside and stood for a moment in the early morning quiet, both of them aware that walking through that door meant crossing a line they couldn't uncross. "Once we go in," Kaya said, "Briggs will know exactly where we are." "He probably already knows." Cole checked the street in both directions. A few early risers were opening shops. A freight wagon rumbled past, but nothing looked immediately dangerous. "Question is how long before he gets here?" They went inside. The front room smelled of ink and paper and old coffee. A clerk sat behind a desk, a young man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers who looked up with the weary expression of someone who'd worked through the night. "We're closed until 8, he said. "We need to see Thomas Milliken," Kaya said. "Now." The clerk's eyes sharpened at the name. "Mr. Milliken isn't seeing anyone without an appointment." "He'll see me." Kaya leaned on the desk, and something in her voice made the clerk lean back. "Tell him Kaya Nara is here. Tell him I need the insurance policy." The clerk hesitated, then stood and disappeared through a door at the back. Cole moved to the window, watching the street. A man in a dark suit had stopped across the way, pretending to read a notice board but positioned where he could see the newspaper office clearly. "We've got eyes on us already," Cole said quietly. Kaya joined him at the window. "That was faster than I expected." Briggs has had 3 days to position people. He knew this was the endgame. The clerk returned with an older man trailing behind him. Thomas Milliken was maybe 50, with thinning hair and the kind of ink stains that never quite washed out of skin. But his eyes were sharp, and when he saw Kaya, relief crossed his face so quickly Cole almost missed it. "Thank the heavens," Milliken said, then caught himself. "I mean, I'd heard rumors, people saying you were dead." "Not yet." Kaya glanced at the clerk. "Can we speak privately?" Milliken nodded and led them into a back office crammed with paper stacks, old ledgers, and a desk buried under correspondence. He closed the door and turned to face them. "The documents I sent you," Kaya said without preamble. "Please tell me you still have them." "I have them. And I verified everything I could. The weapons shipments, the falsified reports, the money transfers from Washington." Milliken sat heavily in his chair. "It's all true. Every word. Briggs has been orchestrating this for at least 8 months, probably longer." "Have you published?" "Not yet. I was waiting for you to confirm the final pieces, and when you didn't show up on schedule..." He spread his hands. "I didn't know if you were captured or if the whole thing was compromised." Cole spoke up for the first time. "It's compromised now. Briggs knows we're here. You publish that story, you paint a target on yourself." "I'm aware of the risks, Mr. Tanner." "Cole Tanner." Milliken's eyes widened slightly. "The rancher from Copper Wells, the one who lost his family?" "That's me." "Then you understand what's at stake here. Briggs isn't just stealing land, he's manufacturing a war that will kill hundreds, maybe thousands. If exposing that puts me at risk, so be it." Kaya moved to the desk. "How fast can you run the story?" I've had it typeset for 2 days, waiting for final confirmation. We can start printing within the hour. Milliken pulled out a leather folder and opened it, revealing page proofs covered in tight columns of text. The headline read, "Conspiracy Uncovered. Army Officer Orchestrates False War for Silver Rights." Cole scanned the first few paragraphs. It was all there, laid out in clear, damning detail. Names, dates, amounts. The kind of evidence that could bring down not just Briggs, but everyone connected to him. "This runs, and people are going to die," Cole said bluntly. "People are already dying," Milliken shot back. "The question is whether they die in the dark, not knowing why, or die with the truth exposed so it can't happen again." "Pretty words, but you're not the one who'll be bleeding. Neither are you, if you're smart. You've done your part, both of you. Give me your statements. Let me add them to the story. Then get out of Tucson and don't look back." Kaya was quiet, staring at the page proofs like they might catch fire. Finally, she said, "If we run now, Briggs wins anyway. The story breaks, there's an investigation, maybe some people in Washington get embarrassed. But Briggs disappears, reinvents himself somewhere else, and in 5 years, he's running the same game with different players." "So what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we don't just expose him, we end him." Milliken looked between them. "You're talking about taking the law into your own hands." "I'm talking about justice when the law's been bought and paid for." Kaya's voice was flat, certain. "Briggs has 40 men, maybe more by now. He's got weapons, money, political protection. The only thing he doesn't have is the element of surprise." Cole saw where she was going. "You want to draw him out? Use the story as bait. The moment this publishes, he has 2 choices. Run and hope the investigation dies, or silence everyone involved before the story spreads." She looked at Milliken. "He'll come for you first, which means we can be waiting." "Absolutely not," Milliken said. "I won't be used as bait in some personal vendetta." "It's not personal. It's necessary. It's suicide. You're talking about facing down an entire private army with what, the 2 of you?" Kaya smiled, and it wasn't friendly. "We've done all right so far." Cole moved back to the window. The man in the dark suit was still there, now joined by another. And down the street, 3 riders had appeared, dismounting outside the hotel. They wore range clothes, but they moved like soldiers, and their eyes kept sweeping toward the newspaper office. "We don't have time to argue," Cole said. "Briggs is already positioning his people. This building's going to be surrounded within the hour." Milliken went pale. "Then what do you propose?" Cole thought fast, mapping the town in his head. Tucson was small enough that everyone knew everyone's business, but big enough to have multiple ways in and out. The newspaper office sat on a corner, which meant at least 2 street approaches. There was probably a back exit through the print shop. "How many employees do you have, Yam?" he asked. 5, counting myself and the clerk. 2 typesetters, 1 pressman, 1 boy who runs errands. Send them home, right now. Anyone who's here when this goes bad is going to get hurt." "And me?" "You stay. We need you to run the presses." Cole turned to Kaya. "How long until your father could get warriors here?" 2 days if I sent word now, maybe a day and a half if they rode hard." "Too long. Briggs will move before then." Cole checked his ammunition. Still had maybe 20 rounds for the Winchester, a few more in his belt. Not enough for a sustained fight, but enough to make a stand if it came to that. "We need local help. Law, militia, anyone who's not on Briggs' payroll." Milliken stood abruptly. "Sheriff Dawson. He's honest, or as honest as they come out here. If I can get word to him, do it. Fast." Kaya was already moving toward the back of the building. "I'll check our exit routes. Cole, watch the front." The next hour passed in tense preparation. Milliken sent his employees away with instructions to stay home and keep quiet. He then dispatched his errand boy through the back door with a message for the sheriff, written in careful code that wouldn't make sense to anyone intercepting it. Meanwhile, Cole and Kaya fortified the building as best they could, stacking furniture against windows and finding positions with clear fields of fire. The print shop in the back was a cavern of machinery, massive iron presses, racks of lead type, barrels of ink. Milliken moved through it with the confidence of long practice, setting pages into the press bed, adjusting rollers, preparing to run the story that would either change everything or get them all killed. "How many copies can you print?" Kaya asked. As many as you want, but distribution is the problem. If Briggs locks down the town, we can print 1,000 copies, and they won't leave this building. Then we make sure they leave this building. She was thinking out loud, pacing between the presses. What if we didn't wait for distribution? What if we brought people here? Cole understood immediately. Witnesses. The more people who see the story before Briggs can suppress it, the harder it becomes to bury. Exactly. Milliken, you know the town. Who do we trust? Milliken considered. There's a dozen merchants on this street who hate Briggs' supply monopolies. The Methodist minister has been preaching against the violence. And there's a women's society that's been demanding answers about the missing men from the last raid. Get word to all of them. Tell them there's going to be a public reading of a major story at noon, and they need to come armed with the truth. Kaya smiled grimly. Let's see Briggs try to silence a crowd. That's assuming he doesn't just shoot into the crowd. He won't, not with witnesses. He spent months building this conspiracy in secret. The last thing he wants is a public massacre in the middle of Tucson. Cole wasn't so sure about that, but they were committed now. Milliken slipped out the back to spread the word while Cole and Kaya settled in to wait. The presses began to clank and rumble, churning out copies of the story, each one another nail in Briggs's coffin. Outside, the watchers had multiplied. Cole counted at least 8 men now, stationed at various points around the block. They weren't trying to hide anymore. The message was clear. Nobody leaves. They're not coming in, Cole observed. Just watching. Waiting for orders. Kaya checked the Colt for the 10th time. Briggs is probably still out in the desert trying to track us. When he realizes we're here, he'll come himself. You sound certain. I am. He doesn't trust anyone else to finish this. Too much at stake. Cole thought about the colonel with the silver hair, the calculating eyes. Kaya was probably right. Men like Briggs didn't delegate the important kills. Around mid-morning, Sheriff Dawson arrived with 3 deputies. He was a weathered man in his 60s, with a star pinned to a vest that had seen better days. He looked at the armed men watching the newspaper office, and his jaw tightened. "Someone want to tell me what's happening here?" he called out to no one in particular. One of the watchers, a lean man with a rifle, stepped forward. "Private business, Sheriff. Nothing that concerns the law. Armed men surrounding a newspaper office concerns me plenty." Dawson rested his hand on his pistol. "You boys have business inside. You can state it to me first. We're waiting for someone." "Who?" "That's between us and them." Dawson studied the man for a long moment, then turned and walked deliberately toward the newspaper office front door. The watchers tensed but didn't move to stop him. Cole opened the door before he could knock. "Sheriff?" "Tanner. Heard you were dead." "Heard that myself. Turned out to be exaggerated." Dawson came inside and looked around at the fortified windows, the rifles, the tension thick enough to taste. "This is about Briggs." It wasn't a question, but Cole answered anyway. "It is. Milliken sent me a message, said there was something I needed to see. I'm guessing it's not just the morning weather report." Kaya appeared from the back, a newspaper proof in her hand. She gave it to Dawson without a word. He read slowly, his expression growing darker with each paragraph. When he finished, he looked up at them both. "This is all verified?" "Every word," Kaya said. "I spent 6 months documenting it. Names, dates, amounts. Briggs has been planning this since last spring. And you're—" Dawson paused. "You're Samuel Nara's daughter." "I am." "Your father's a good man. Kept the peace when others wanted war." The sheriff folded the proof carefully. "If this is true, and I'm inclined to believe it is, then we've got a problem bigger than my jurisdiction." "Which is why we're going public," Milliken said, emerging from the print shop with ink-stained hands. "Noon today. Public reading in the street. Let everyone in Tucson know what's been happening." Dawson looked at the armed men outside. "Briggs won't allow it." "Briggs doesn't get a vote. He's got 40 guns that say otherwise." The sheriff moved to the window. "Those men out there are just the advance. When Briggs gets word you're here, he'll bring everyone. You're talking about a battle in the middle of town." Cole stepped forward. "Then help us make sure it's a short battle. You've got deputies, you've got authority. Arrest those men for threatening citizens." "On what charge? Standing in the street isn't illegal." "Then tell them to move along. I can try." Dawson didn't sound optimistic. He walked back outside and Cole watched as he approached the watchers. There was a brief conversation, voices raised but not quite shouting. Then one of the watchers shook his head and turned away, dismissing the sheriff entirely. Dawson came back inside, his face red. "They're not moving," said they're exercising their right to free assembly. "And we're exercising our right to free press," Milliken said. "Looks like we're at a standoff." The morning crawled forward. More people began appearing on the street, merchants, townspeople, drawn by word of mouth and curiosity. Milliken's message had spread faster than Cole expected, and by 11:30 there were maybe 50 people gathered in front of the newspaper office, talking in low voices and shooting suspicious glances at the armed watchers. The watchers looked increasingly nervous. They'd signed on to intimidate a couple of fugitives, not to face down half the town. At 11:45, a rider came hard down Congress Street and pulled up at the newspaper office. He was young, barely 20, and his horse was lathered with sweat. He pushed through the crowd and pounded on the door. Cole opened it carefully, rifle ready. "Message for Kaya Nara," the rider gasped. "From her father." Kaya appeared immediately. "What happened?" "Your people. They're under attack. Started at dawn. Soldiers and militia, maybe 100 strong, hitting the winter camp." The young man was shaking, either from exhaustion or fear. "Your father sent me to find you. He says it started, the war Briggs wanted. He says," the rider swallowed hard, "he says they're not going to survive without help." The color drained from Kaya's face. "How many casualties?" "Don't know. I rode out when the shooting started, but there were a lot of guns and most of our warriors were out on patrol. The camp was mostly elders and children." Cole felt something cold settle in his stomach. This was the play. Briggs couldn't stop the story from running, so he'd started the war anyway. Even if the truth came out, even if he went down, he'd make sure the bloodshed happened first. Scorched earth. Take everyone down with him. "When did you leave?" Kaya demanded. 6 hours ago. I've been riding straight through." 6 hours. The battle could be over by now. Her people could be dead or scattered, the winter camp burned, everything her father had tried to protect destroyed. Kaya turned to Milliken. "Run the story. Now. Every copy you can print and give them to anyone who'll take one. Make sure it spreads." "Where are you going?" "To stop a massacre." She was already grabbing her rifle, checking ammunition with shaking hands. "If Briggs wants his war, he's going to get one." Cole grabbed her arm. "Wait. Think about this. It's a 6-hour ride back to the winter camp. Even if we left right now, we'd arrive after dark. We'd be riding into an active battle with no intel, no support, against 100 armed men. Then I'll die with my people instead of hiding here while they're slaughtered. Or you finish what you started. The story runs, the truth gets out, and Briggs loses his political protection. Without that, the army brass will have to investigate. They'll pull back the attack. You think bureaucrats in Washington care about one tribal camp? They'll express regret, promise an inquiry, and nothing will change." Kaya's voice cracked. "Those are my people dying." "I know, but riding into a trap won't save them." She jerked her arm free. "I'm not asking for your permission." "Good, because you're not getting it." Cole moved to block the door. "You want to help your father? Then we end this the right way. We draw Briggs here, we expose everything, and we make damn sure the people responsible face justice." "Justice." Kaya laughed, the sound bitter and broken. "You still believe in that?" "I have to believe in something." They stared at each other, the room silent except for the rumble of the printing press in the back. Outside, the crowd had grown larger, sensing something important was about to happen. Finally, Sheriff Dawson spoke. "The boy's got a point. You ride out there now, you're just one more casualty. But if we can force Briggs to show his hand here, in front of witnesses, we might be able to stop this before it spreads. And if we can't? If my father dies while we're playing political games? Then at least it won't be for nothing." Dawson's voice was gentle but firm. "Sometimes the best way to honor the dead is to make sure others don't join them." Kaya closed her eyes, breathing hard, and Cole could see the war happening inside her. Duty versus family. Strategy versus instinct. The choice that had no good answer. When she opened her eyes again, something had hardened there. "We do this your way. But if it doesn't work, if Briggs walks away from this, I'm going after him myself. and I won't stop until one of us is dead." "Fair enough." Cole turned to Milliken. "How many copies have you printed?" "About 200 so far. I can have 500 by end of day." "Start handing them out. Anyone who wants one gets one. Make it impossible to suppress." Milliken nodded and began gathering stacks of newsprint. He recruited the sheriff's deputies and several townspeople to help distribute, and soon copies were spreading through the crowd like wildfire. People read in clusters, voices rising in anger and disbelief as they absorbed the details of the conspiracy. Cole watched from the window as the mood shifted. These were people who'd lost family to the raids, who'd been told it was tribal aggression or random violence. Now they were learning it had been orchestrated, that their grief had been manufactured for profit. They weren't happy about it. One of the watchers tried to grab a newspaper from an old woman's hands. 3 men immediately stepped in, and suddenly there was pushing and shouting. The watcher backed off, and his companions began looking distinctly outnumbered. "It's working," Dawson said. "The town's turning against them." "Briggs still has 40 guns, Cole reminded him. 40 guns against 100 angry citizens is different math than 40 guns against 2 fugitives. The clock struck noon. Milliken stepped outside onto a makeshift platform, just a couple of crates stacked together, and raised his hands for quiet. The crowd settled into tense silence. "People of Tucson," he began, his voice carrying across the street. "What you're reading today is the truth about the violence that's been tearing our territory apart. For months, we've been told that we're under attack from hostile tribes. We've been told that military force is necessary to protect our homes and families." He held up a newspaper. "This is a lie. The attacks have been orchestrated by Colonel Marcus Briggs and a network of corrupt officials in Washington. They've been arming both sides, staging false flag raids, all to justify seizing tribal lands that contain valuable silver deposits." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted, "Where's your proof?" "The proof is in your hands. Names, dates, financial records. Everything documented by a brave woman who risked her life to expose this conspiracy." Milliken gestured toward the newspaper office. "Kaya Nara, daughter of Chief Samuel Nara, spent 6 months gathering evidence. And as we speak, soldiers under Briggs' command are attacking her people's winter camp, killing innocents to silence anyone who knows the truth." The murmurs turned to angry shouts. Cole could see the crowd's mood crystallizing into something dangerous and righteous. This was what Briggs had feared, not just exposure, but the fury of ordinary people realizing they'd been used. Then someone in the crowd screamed. Cole's head snapped toward the sound. At the end of Congress Street, riders were appearing in formation, 2 columns of armed men moving with military precision. At their head rode a tall man with silver hair wearing a colonel's insignia and an expression of cold fury. Briggs had arrived. The crowd scattered like startled birds, people diving into doorways and behind wagons as Briggs' column advanced down Congress Street. Cole counted 30 riders, all armed, all moving with the discipline of men who'd done this before. They spread out as they approached, forming a semicircle that boxed in the newspaper office and the 100 or so townspeople who hadn't fled fast enough. Briggs rode to the front and stopped maybe 40 feet from where Milliken still stood on his makeshift platform. The colonel sat straight in his saddle, one hand resting casually on his thigh, the other holding his reins. He looked at the scattered newspapers littering the street like they were nothing more interesting than fallen leaves. "Thomas Milliken," Briggs said, his voice carrying easily in the sudden quiet. "That's sedition you're publishing. Libel at best. I could have you arrested." Milliken's hands were shaking, but his voice held steady. "Truth isn't libel, Colonel. Truth is whatever I say it is when I've got 30 rifles backing me up." Briggs's eyes moved across the crowd, then settled on the newspaper office windows. "Miss Nara, Mr. Tanner, I know you're in there. This has gone on long enough. Come out and we can end this peacefully." Cole stepped to the doorway, rifle held low but ready. "Peaceful. That's rich coming from a man who just ordered an attack on a camp full of women and children. I ordered a military action against hostile forces who've been raiding settlements for months. If there were civilians present, that's unfortunate. But war has casualties." "It's not a war. It's a massacre you staged for profit." Briggs smiled, and it was the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That's your story, but stories need proof. And proof can be, disputed. Documents can be forged. Witnesses can be mistaken. He gestured at the newspapers. All you've done is spread lies that will be debunked within a week. Then why are you here? Kaya appeared beside Cole, the Colt in her hand. If it's all lies, why bring 30 men to a newspaper office? Because lies are dangerous. They get good men killed and territories destabilized. I'm here to restore order. Sheriff Dawson pushed through the crowd, his 3 deputies following. Colonel, I'm going to have to ask you to stand down. This is a civilian matter, not military. Sheriff, Briggs didn't even look at him. This stopped being a civilian matter the moment armed fugitives took hostages in a public building. Nobody's taken hostages. I count at least 50 people trapped behind my line with nowhere to go. That sounds like a hostage situation to me. Briggs raised his voice. Citizens of Tucson, I'm giving you one chance to clear the area. Anyone still here in 5 minutes will be considered complicit in this insurrection. Some people started moving immediately, pushing toward the side streets, but others held their ground, newspapers clutched in their fists, anger overriding fear. An old man in a shopkeeper's apron stepped forward. We read the story, Colonel. We saw the evidence. You can't just shoot your way out of this. Can I? Briggs gestured, and his men leveled their rifles at the crowd. Last chance. Move or be moved. Cole felt the moment crystallize. This was the play. Briggs was going to kill everyone here and call it suppressing a riot. In the chaos, the newspapers would disappear, witnesses would be silenced, and by the time anyone investigated, the narrative would be set. Just another outbreak of violence in a lawless territory. Wait. Cole stepped fully into the doorway, making himself visible. You want us? You've got us. Let these people go. Cole, Kaya started. Let them go and we'll surrender. No more running, no more fighting. You get what you want. Briggs studied him for a long moment. Just like that? Just like that. And I'm supposed to believe a man who's been shooting my people for 3 days suddenly wants to surrender? I'm supposed to believe a man who orchestrates massacres cares about my honesty? Cole lowered his rifle slowly, keeping his movements visible. But here we are. You want this over, so do I. Let the civilians clear out, and we'll end it. Kaya grabbed his arm. What are you doing? Buying time. For what? For whatever comes next. He kept his eyes on Briggs. Well, Colonel, do we have a deal? Briggs was quiet, and Cole could almost see him calculating odds and angles. A public massacre would be hard to explain, but if the fugitives surrendered voluntarily, that was a different story. Arrest them, move them somewhere quiet, and finish it out of sight. All right, Briggs said finally. Civilians have 2 minutes to clear the street. Then you and Miss Nara come out, unarmed, hands visible. The crowd didn't need to be told twice. People scattered in every direction, disappearing into shops and side streets, taking their newspapers with them. Within 90 seconds, the street was nearly empty, except for Briggs' men, the sheriff and his deputies, and a handful of stubborn citizens who'd taken cover but hadn't left. Milliken appeared at Cole's shoulder. You can't seriously be surrendering. I'm seriously buying these people time to get clear before the shooting starts. The shooting? You mean you're planning to get to the back of the building? There's a print shop door that leads to the alley. When things go loud, you run and you don't stop. I'm not leaving you to... Cole turned and looked at him directly. This story of yours matters more than we do. If you die here, Briggs wins. If you live, even if we don't, at least the truth survives. Now go. Milliken hesitated, then nodded and disappeared into the back. Cole heard the print shop door creak open, then slam shut. Good. One less person to worry about. Kaya checked the cylinder of her Colt, counting rounds. What's the actual plan? Still working on it. That's not inspiring confidence. Welcome to my life. Cole moved to the window and studied the positions. Briggs's men had formed a loose perimeter, but they weren't in cover. They were confident, exposed, expecting an easy arrest. When I give the signal, aim for the horses. Drop 3 or 4 mounts and the formation breaks. And then? Then we move to the roof and hope the sheriff has more spine than I think he does. Dawson appeared in the doorway behind them. I heard that, and I've got plenty of spine, thank you very much. But I've also got 3 deputies and 4 bullets between us. Against 30 rifles, that's not great math. You're right, but you're also sworn to uphold the law, and Briggs just threatened to massacre a street full of citizens. So you can either help us stop him, or you can step aside and explain later why you let it happen." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "What do you need?" "Cover fire when we move. Position your deputies in the buildings across the street. When things go sideways, make Briggs think twice about an open assault." "That's not much of a plan." "It's the plan we've got." Dawson looked at his deputies, 3 young men who suddenly seemed very aware they might not see tomorrow. "You boys don't have to do this. No shame in walking away." The nearest deputy, a kid maybe 22 with freckles and red hair, shook his head. "My brother died in one of those raids 6 months back. I'm not walking away." The other 2 nodded agreement. Dawson sighed, then gave them quick instructions and sent them scrambling to positions in the buildings across the street. Outside, Briggs called out again. "Time's up, Tanner. You coming out, or do we come in?" Cole stepped to the doorway one more time. "We're coming. Hold your fire." He set the Winchester down just inside the door, where he could grab it fast, then stepped out into the street with his hands raised. Kaya followed a step behind, the Colt tucked into the back of her belt, but hidden under her shirt. They walked slowly toward Briggs, feet scuffing the dirt, and Cole could feel 30 rifles tracking their every move. The colonel sat motionless on his horse, watching them approach with the expression of a man who'd already won. When they were 10 feet away, Cole stopped. "Close enough," he said. Briggs smiled. "You're in no position to set terms." "Maybe not, but I'm curious about something. That raid on the winter camp this morning. How many did you kill?" "I didn't kill anyone. The Army responded to reports of hostile activity." "Stop lying. You ordered it. You wanted Kaya's people wiped out before they could corroborate the story." "So how many?" Something flickered across Briggs' face. Annoyance, maybe, or just impatience. "Does it matter?" "To me it does. To them it will." "Them?" Briggs looked around the empty street. "Your witnesses are gone, Tanner. It's just us now." "Look again." Briggs turned and his expression shifted as he saw what Cole had already noticed. The townspeople hadn't all fled. They'd taken cover in doorways and behind wagons and in second-story windows, but they were still there, watching, some of them armed. And on the rooftops across the street, 4 figures with rifles were now visible against the sky. The sheriff's deputies, positioned exactly where Cole had asked. "You think a handful of shopkeepers frightens me?" Briggs' hand moved toward his pistol. "I've got professional soldiers. You've got hired thugs who followed you for money. Question is whether they'll follow you into a street fight against their own people." Cole raised his voice. "Any of you men out there know what you're really fighting for? It's not protecting settlers. It's not defending the territory. It's making one man rich off silver he's stealing from tribal land." Several of the riders shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a lean man with a corporal's stripes, spoke up. "Colonel, is that true?" "Of course it's not true. These are criminals spreading lies to avoid justice." "Then why'd you have us attack the winter camp? Those were women and children, not warriors." "I gave you orders, Corporal. That should be enough." "It was enough until I saw who we were shooting." The corporal's hand drifted away from his rifle. "I signed on to fight hostiles, not murder families." Briggs's face went hard. "Stand down, soldier." "No, sir, I don't think I will." 3 more riders moved their horses out of the line, separating themselves from Briggs's formation. The colonel's carefully organized force was cracking, and everyone could see it. "Last warning," Briggs said, his voice ice cold. "Anyone who breaks ranks will be shot for desertion." The corporal laughed, the sound bitter. "You're not Army anymore, Colonel. You're just a man with a gun and a bad plan, and I'm done following both." He turned his horse and rode away, and 2 others followed. Briggs' face went purple with rage. He drew his pistol and fired once, the shot echoing off the buildings. The corporal jerked in his saddle but kept riding, one hand pressed to his shoulder. The street exploded. The remaining riders scattered, some diving for cover, others wheeling their horses in confusion. The deputies on the rooftops opened fire, not aiming to kill, but to drive Briggs' men back. Return fire cracked from a dozen directions, shattering windows and punching holes in adobe walls. Cole grabbed Kaya and pulled her behind a water trough as bullets whined overhead. He snatched the Winchester from where he'd hidden it just inside the newspaper office doorway and came up shooting, placing careful rounds at Briggs's position. The colonel had dismounted and taken cover behind his horse, using the animal as a shield while he directed his remaining men. Cole hated to do it, but he put a round into the horse's flank. The animal screamed and bolted, leaving Briggs exposed. The colonel rolled behind a wagon just as 3 bullets tore up the ground where he'd been. He came up firing, his shots disciplined and accurate. One of the deputies on the rooftop went down clutching his leg. "We need to move," Kaya shouted over the gunfire. "They're going to flank us." She was right. Half of Briggs' men were already circling around through the side streets, trying to get behind the newspaper office. If they succeeded, Cole and Kaya would be trapped in a crossfire. "The roof," Cole said. "There's a ladder inside. We get high. We can see them coming." They scrambled back into the building and found the ladder leading to the roof access. Cole went first, kicking open the trap door and emerging into the bright sunlight. The roof was flat adobe with a low parapet wall running around the edge. Perfect cover. Kaya came up behind him, breathing hard, the Colt in her hand. From here they could see the whole street laid out below. Briggs had regrouped his men, maybe 20 left now, and was directing them with hand signals. Professional work, even in chaos. "There," Kaya pointed to the east, where 4 riders were threading through the alley. "They're trying to cut off the back exit." Cole sighted down the Winchester and fired twice, dropping 1 rider and scattering the others. They retreated into cover, pinned but not broken. Below, Sheriff Dawson emerged from a shop across the street and fired his pistol at Briggs's position. The old lawman was trying to close the distance, keep the pressure on, but he was outgunned and outnumbered. One of Briggs' men lined up a shot on the sheriff's back. Cole put a round through the man's shoulder before he could fire. The shooter went down, and Dawson kept moving, oblivious to how close he'd come to dying. "We can't hold this forever," Kaya said. She'd emptied the Colt and was reloading with cartridges from her belt. "Eventually they'll either rush us or burn us out." "I know." Cole checked his ammunition. Maybe 8 rounds left in the Winchester, 4 more in his belt. Not enough for a sustained fight. "We need to end this fast. Got any bright ideas?" "One, but you're not going to like it." Before she could ask what he meant, Cole stood fully upright and shouted down to the street. "Briggs, you want this over? Then let's finish it. You and me, right now. Winner walks away." The shooting stopped as everyone processed what he'd just said. Even Kaya was staring at him like he'd lost his mind. "Have you completely—" she started. "Trust me." Briggs stepped out from behind the wagon, pistol in hand, and looked up at the roof. "You're challenging me to a duel? How quaintly old-fashioned. Call it whatever you want. Point is, your men stand down, the civilians stay clear, and we settle this ourselves. Win or lose, it's done. And if I refuse, then we keep shooting until one side runs out of bullets or bodies. Your choice." The colonel considered this, and Cole could see him weighing the options. A duel was risky, but Briggs was fast and accurate, and probably assumed he was better than some broken-down rancher. Meanwhile, a prolonged firefight meant more witnesses, more chaos, more chances for something to go wrong. "All right," Briggs said finally, "but when I kill you, the woman surrenders. No more running, no more fighting." "Fine. And when I kill you, your men ride out and don't come back." "Agreed." Briggs holstered his pistol and stepped into the middle of the street, arms at his sides. "Whenever you're ready, Tanner." Cole handed the Winchester to Kaya and checked the Colt Dawson had given him days ago. 6 rounds, all loaded. His hand felt steady, his breathing even. Strange how calm he felt, knowing he was about to try killing a man or die trying. "Don't do this," Kaya whispered. "There's got to be another way." "If there was, I'd take it. But right now, this is our best chance to end it without more people dying." "You mean without you dying?" Cole smiled. "That too." He climbed down the ladder and walked out into the street. The sun was directly overhead now, eliminating shadows and making everything sharp-edged and clear. Briggs stood 40 feet away, relaxed and confident, one hand hovering near his holstered pistol. Cole moved to the center point and stopped, positioning himself so the sun wasn't in his eyes. Old habits from another life, when he'd been younger and stupider, and thought being fast with a gun mattered. "Any last words?" Briggs asked. "Just one question. 6 years ago, did you send raiders to my ranch? Did you order my family killed?" Briggs tilted his head, genuinely puzzled. "I honestly don't remember. I've sent raiders to a lot of ranches over the years. Does it matter?" Something cold and final settled in Cole's chest. "Yeah, it matters." "Then I'll tell you this. Whether it was me or not, they died for the same reason everyone dies out here. They were in the way of progress. Nothing personal. It was personal to me. Cole's hand dropped to his pistol. He was fast, maybe faster than he'd been in years, muscle memory and rage combining into pure motion. The Colt cleared leather, came up smooth, and fired. But Briggs was faster. The Colonel's shot hit Cole in the left shoulder, spinning him halfway around. The impact felt like being kicked by a horse, all force and heat and sudden wrongness. Cole's return shot went wide, punching a hole in the adobe wall behind Briggs. Briggs smiled and aimed for a kill shot. Then Kaya fired from the roof. Her bullet took Briggs in the right arm, shattering bone and sending his pistol flying. The Colonel staggered, clutching his ruined arm, shock and fury warring on his face. "You cheated," he gasped. "No," Kaya said, working the action on the rifle she'd picked up. "I just didn't agree to your stupid rules." Briggs's remaining men started to raise their weapons, but Sheriff Dawson stepped out into the open, his own gun leveled. "Anyone who fires on that roof answers to me, and the law says I can shoot back." The riders hesitated, caught between following a wounded colonel and facing down an angry lawman backed by half the town. The moment stretched, tense and fragile, balanced on the edge of violence. Then one of them lowered his rifle. "I didn't sign up for this." He dismounted and walked away, leading his horse. Another followed, then two more. Within 30 seconds, Briggs was standing alone in the street, bleeding and abandoned, watching his private army evaporate. Cole pushed himself upright, his left arm hanging useless and screaming with pain. He retrieved his pistol from where he'd dropped it and walked slowly toward Briggs. "It's over," he said quietly. "You lost." Briggs laughed, the sound wet and broken. "You think this ends with me? There are a dozen others waiting to take my place. Men in Washington who see this territory as nothing but resources to extract. You've won today, Tanner, but tomorrow, next month, next year, someone else will try the same thing. Maybe, but you won't be around to see it." Cole raised the pistol, and for a moment he saw himself pulling the trigger. Saw Briggs falling, saw justice delivered by his own hand instead of by lawyers and judges who might never convict. Then he lowered the gun. "Sheriff," he said, "Colonel Briggs is under arrest for conspiracy, murder, and treason. I'm sure you've got a cell that'll hold him." Dawson came forward with handcuffs, and Briggs didn't resist. The fight had gone out of him completely, replaced by cold calculation as he started working through whatever legal defense his money could buy. Kaya climbed down from the roof and came to Cole's side. "You're bleeding." "I noticed." "We need to get you to a doctor." "In a minute." Cole looked around at the street, at the scattered newspapers and the bullet holes and the people starting to emerge from cover. "First, I need to know if your people survived. The winter camp." Kaya's face tightened. "I'll send riders. Should have word by tomorrow." "And if they didn't?" "Then Briggs dying slow in a cell is going to feel like mercy compared to what I'll want to do to him." Cole understood that sentiment better than he wanted to. But he also understood that revenge was a fire that burned everyone it touched, and sometimes the hardest thing was choosing not to light the match. The doctor turned out to be a German immigrant with steady hands and no patience for stupidity. He dug the bullet out of Cole's shoulder while lecturing him about the foolishness of dueling in the modern age. Cole bore it in silence, his teeth gritted against the pain. Kaya waited in the outer room, cleaning her rifle and ignoring the stares of the other patients. When the doctor finally released Cole with his arm in a sling and instructions to rest that Cole had no intention of following, she stood immediately. "Riders came back," she said, "from the winter camp." Cole's heart sank at her expression. "How bad?" 23 dead, mostly elders who couldn't run fast enough when the shooting started. Another dozen wounded." Her voice was flat, emotionless, which meant she was holding everything in tight. "My father survived. He got most of the children to safety in the caves before the soldiers overran the camp." "I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't bring them back." She walked toward the door, then paused. "But he also sent a message. Said to tell you that the tribe owes you a debt. You and your friend with the printing press. Without that story running, without the public outcry, the army might have finished what they started." "What happens now?" "Now my father negotiates. The territorial governor is sending representatives, promising an investigation. Whether anything actually changes, she shrugged. We'll see. And you? I'm going home. Help bury the dead. Help rebuild what was burned. Try to make sure it doesn't happen again. She looked at him directly. What about you? Cole thought about his ranch, empty and cold, waiting for a man who wasn't sure he wanted to go back to being alone. He thought about the last 3 days, about fighting for something that mattered instead of just surviving. Haven't decided yet, he said honestly. Well, when you do, you know where to find me. Kaya held out her hand, and Cole shook it. Her grip was firm, calloused, the hand of someone who'd never backed down from a fight. Take care of yourself, Tanner. You too. She left, and Cole watched her ride north toward the mountains, toward the people who needed her more than he did. He felt the absence like a weight, the sudden understanding that he'd spent days with someone who understood him better than anyone had in years, and now she was gone. He walked back to the newspaper office, where Milliken was already running a second edition with the headline, Conspiracy Exposed, Colonel Arrested. Bampu Masing. The story included first-hand accounts from the soldiers who'd defected, testimony from townspeople, and a promise that the investigation would reach Washington itself. Think it'll stick? Cole asked. Milliken looked up from the press, ink-stained and exhausted and somehow triumphant. Maybe. Probably not all of it. But we've gotten too many people asking questions now. They can't bury this completely. So we won. We survived. Whether that counts as winning, he shrugged. Ask me in a year. Cole spent that night in a boarding house, his shoulder throbbing and his mind too restless for sleep. He lay in the dark and thought about his sons, wondered what they would have thought of their father becoming a fugitive and a gunfighter for hire. Probably would have been horrified. Or maybe proud. Hard to say. Around dawn, he gave up on sleep and went downstairs. The boarding house owner was already up, making coffee, and she poured him a cup without asking. You're the one who helped expose Briggs, she said. It wasn't a question. I helped, yeah. My nephew died in one of those raids last year. The army told us it was tribal violence, nothing they could have prevented. She set the coffee pot down hard. Turns out they were lying. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be sure it doesn't happen again. She looked at him directly. Territory needs good men willing to stand up. We've got plenty who'll fight for money. Not so many who'll fight for what's right. Cole carried those words with him as he walked through the waking town. People nodded to him now, some with respect, some with curiosity, all of them knowing who he was and what he'd done. It felt strange after years of anonymity, of being just another broken rancher drinking away his grief. At the sheriff's office, Dawson was at his desk, working through a stack of papers that looked like they might bury him. Territorial governor wants a full report, the sheriff explained. Every detail, every witness, every piece of evidence. Going to take me weeks. Need help? Dawson looked up, surprised. You volunteering? Maybe. Depends on what you're offering. The sheriff leaned back in his chair, studying Cole with shrewd eyes. I could use a deputy, someone who's not afraid of a fight and doesn't have ties to the local power structure. Pay's not great, but it's steady work. I'm not a lawman. Neither was I, 20 years ago. Turns out it's something you learn by doing. Dawson pulled a badge from his desk drawer and set it on the surface between them. Think about it anyway. Cole looked at the badge, worn silver with the word deputy engraved across the center. He thought about going back to his empty ranch, to the silence and the memories. Then he thought about the last 3 days, about fighting beside Kaya and standing up to men who thought power made them untouchable. He picked up the badge. When do I start? Dawson handed Cole the badge 3 hours later, after swearing him in with a ceremony that consisted of raising his right hand and promising to uphold the law. No speeches, no formality, just the quiet understanding between two men who'd seen enough of the world to know that words mattered less than actions. First order of business, the sheriff said, settling back into his chair with a groan. We need to make sure Briggs doesn't disappear before the territorial judge arrives. He's got friends with deep pockets, and I wouldn't put it past them to arrange a jailbreak. Cole pinned the badge to his vest, feeling the unfamiliar weight of it. You think they'd try that in broad daylight? I think desperate men do desperate things, and Briggs is looking at a noose if this goes to trial. Dawson pulled out a ring of keys. I want someone watching that cell around the clock. You up for first shift? The jail was a squat adobe building behind the main office, with 4 cells and bars that had seen better days. Briggs occupied the farthest cell, sitting on a narrow cot with his injured arm bandaged and his face carefully blank. He looked up when Cole entered, and something like amusement flickered across his features. Deputy Tanner, how quickly fortunes change. Cole pulled up a chair and sat where he could watch both the cell and the door. You've got nothing to say that I want to hear. No? Not even about how naive you're being? Briggs stood and walked to the bars, moving carefully to favor his wounded arm. You think pinning on a badge makes you one of the good men? You think it erases what you've done? I'm not trying to erase anything. Then you're a fool. The law isn't justice, Tanner. It's just another form of power, and power flows to whoever can take it and keep it. Right now, you've got a little, but it won't last. Cole didn't respond. He'd learned a long time ago that men like Briggs lived to hear themselves talk, to probe for weaknesses they could exploit. Silence was the best answer. But Briggs wasn't finished. You know what happens next? The investigation comes, asks a lot of questions, makes a lot of noise. Maybe they arrest a few minor players, issue some strongly worded reports. But the men at the top, the ones who actually matter, they'll walk away clean. They always do. Maybe you're right. But at least they'll walk away knowing people are watching. For how long? A month? A year? Eventually, attention fades. People forget. And then it all starts again, just with different names. Briggs gripped the bars. You saved one tribal camp, congratulations. But there are 100 others, and someone else is already planning how to take their land. You can't stop it. You can only choose which side you're on when it happens. Cole met his eyes. Then I choose to be on the side that doesn't murder children for profit. High-minded, and ultimately pointless. Briggs returned to his cot. But enjoy your moral superiority while it lasts. In 6 months, you'll be just another drunk rancher wondering why nothing ever changes. The conversation ended there, and Cole spent the next 4 hours watching a man who'd orchestrated massacres act like he was the reasonable one in the room. It was exhausting in a way that had nothing to do with the bullet wound in his shoulder. Around sunset, one of the other deputies came to relieve him. Cole walked out into the cooling evening air and found Milliken waiting on the steps. Thought you might be hungry, the newspaperman said, holding up a cloth-wrapped bundle. Sally's diner sent over some beef and potatoes. Said it's on the house for the man who helped expose Briggs. They sat on the steps and ate while the town settled into its evening rhythms. Lamps were being lit in windows, families gathering for supper. The normal life of a place that had come within a hair's breadth of becoming a war zone. The governor's office sent a telegram, Milliken said between bites. They're sending a territorial judge and a prosecutor. Should be here within the week. Think they'll actually prosecute? They don't have much choice now. Too many witnesses, too much documentation. If they try to bury this, every newspaper from here to San Francisco will crucify them. Milliken smiled slightly. That's the beautiful thing about the truth, once it's out. You can't just wish it back into darkness. Briggs seems to think they'll find a way. Briggs is a man who spent his whole life believing power equals control. He can't comprehend a world where people refuse to be controlled. The newspaperman wadded up the cloth from his meal. But that's exactly the world we're building. Slowly, imperfectly, but building it nonetheless. Cole wanted to believe that. Wanted to think that what they'd done mattered in some larger sense beyond just stopping one man's greed. But he'd seen too much of human nature to be entirely convinced. You sound more optimistic than you did 3 days ago, he said. 3 days ago, I thought we'd all be dead and Briggs would win. Shows what I know. Milliken stood and brushed crumbs from his pants. Get some rest, deputy. Something tells me the hard part's still coming. Cole found a room at the boarding house and managed a few hours of sleep before dreams of burning ranches and children's voices woke him in the dark. He lay there listening to the night sounds of the town, dogs barking in the distance, someone singing drunk in a saloon, the wind rattling shutters. Somewhere in those hours between midnight and dawn, he made a decision about what came next. It felt right in a way that surprised him, like a door opening onto something he hadn't known he was looking for. The next morning, he saddled his horse and rode north toward the mountains. The journey took most of the day, following trails that wound through country that shifted from desert to pine forest as elevation climbed. He'd asked around and learned the general location of the winter camp, though finding it specifically required following signs that weren't meant for outsiders. He found it just as the sun was dropping behind the western peaks. The camp sat in a protected valley, surrounded by steep ridges that made it nearly invisible from the main trails. Smoke rose from cook fires, and he could see people moving between shelters, some canvas, some traditional structures made from bent poles and hides. The damage from the attack was still visible. Burned areas where structures had stood, fresh graves on a hillside, and everywhere the quiet tension of people who'd survived something terrible and weren't sure it was over. A group of warriors intercepted him at the camp's edge, rifles ready but not raised. The leader was a man maybe Cole's age, with a scar running from temple to jaw and eyes that had seen too much. "State your business," the warrior said in accented English. "I'm here to see Kaya Nara, and her father, if he'll speak with me." "You're the rancher, Tanner." "I am." The warrior studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Follow me, but keep your hands where I can see them." They led him through the camp, past families rebuilding their homes and elders tending the wounded. People stopped to stare at him, a white man riding into their camp after white soldiers had just tried to wipe them out. Cole couldn't blame them for the suspicion in their eyes. Kaya emerged from one of the larger shelters, surprise crossing her face. "Cole? What are you doing here?" "Needed to talk to you, and your father, if he's willing." She glanced at the warriors, then back to him. "Wait here." She disappeared into the shelter and emerged a moment later with an older man leaning on her arm. Samuel Nara was maybe 60, with iron gray hair worn long and a face carved by weather and time into something that looked like the mountains themselves. Despite his age and obvious exhaustion, he carried himself with a dignity that needed no titles or uniforms. "Mr. Tanner," he said in flawless English, "my daughter tells me you helped save her life, and perhaps saved all our lives by exposing Colonel Briggs. I did what seemed right. I'm sorry I couldn't do more to prevent the attack on your camp. You did more than most would have, more than many of your people have ever done." Samuel gestured toward the shelter. "Come, we'll talk." Inside the shelter was simple but comfortable, with rugs on the floor and a small fire burning in a central pit. They sat, and Kaya poured tea from a pot suspended over the flames. The ritual felt important somehow, a bridge between cultures that had been at war. "I came to deliver a message," Cole said, after they'd drunk in silence. "The territorial governor is sending representatives to negotiate. They want to discuss land rights, treaty enforcement, protection from future attacks." "Wants," Samuel repeated. "An interesting word. What the governor wants and what we need are often different things." "I know. That's why I wanted to talk to you first. I've been made a deputy sheriff in Tucson. It's not much, but it means I have some official standing. If you're willing, I'd like to represent your interests during the negotiations." Kaya nearly dropped her tea. "You want to what?" "Be an advocate. Make sure the promises they make actually get kept, that the treaty terms are fair, that what happened here doesn't happen again." Samuel's expression was unreadable. "Why would you do this?" "Because I'm tired of watching powerful men destroy people who can't fight back. Because your daughter risked everything to expose the truth, and that deserves to be honored. And because—" Cole paused, searching for words. "Because I need to believe that what we went through meant something, that it changed something." "You understand this will make you enemies," Samuel said. "White men don't take kindly to those who side with the tribes. You'll be called a traitor, an Indian lover. Your life will become difficult." "My life's been difficult for 6 years. At least this way, it'll be difficult for a reason." Samuel and Kaya exchanged a long look, some communication passing between them that Cole couldn't read. Finally, the older man nodded. "Then you have our trust, Deputy Tanner. Speak for us when the negotiations come, and perhaps together we can build something better than what came before." They talked into the evening, discussing strategy and terms, what to demand and what to concede. Samuel was shrewd, understanding exactly how much leverage they had, and how quickly it could evaporate if public attention moved elsewhere. Cole found himself respecting the man's intelligence and pragmatism, qualities that had clearly kept his people alive through decades of broken promises. As the fire burned low, Kaya walked Cole back to his horse. The camp had settled into night quiet, children asleep and guards posted at the perimeter. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I know." "So why did you?" Cole thought about that. 6 years ago, I lost everything that mattered to me. Spent all that time since just surviving, not really living. Then I met you, and for 3 days I had a purpose beyond just making it to tomorrow. I don't want to go back to the way things were. Being a deputy won't bring your family back. No, but maybe it'll give their deaths meaning. Maybe it'll prevent other families from going through what I did. He swung into the saddle. "That's worth something." Kaya reached up and touched his boot, a gesture that felt both formal and intimate. "You're a good man, Cole Tanner. Don't let this territory grind that out of you." "I'll try." He rode back to Tucson under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch, and for the first time in years, the darkness didn't feel oppressive. It just felt like night, and morning would come whether he was ready or not. The territorial representatives arrived a week later in a carriage that looked wildly out of place on Tucson's dusty streets. They were government men in suits, carrying leather cases and the kind of certainty that came from never having their decisions questioned. The lead negotiator was a man named Whitmore, with slicked back hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. The negotiations took place in the town hall, a room barely large enough for the table and chairs they'd crammed inside. Samuel Nara attended with 3 of his advisors and Kaya, while the territorial side brought Whitmore, a lawyer, and a stenographer to record everything. Cole sat as Samuel's official advocate, though Whitmore had objected strenuously to a deputy sheriff representing tribal interests. Sheriff Dawson had overruled him, pointing out that Cole was also a citizen with standing to participate in public proceedings. The first day was all posturing and procedural arguments. Whitmore wanted to discuss reasonable land concessions, while Samuel insisted on honoring the existing treaties that Briggs had conspired to violate. They talked in circles for 8 hours and accomplished nothing except establishing mutual distrust. On the second day, things got uglier. "The reality," Whitmore said in a tone that suggested he was explaining something to slow children, "is that settlement is inevitable. People are coming west whether you like it or not. The question isn't whether tribal lands will be developed, but how quickly and under what terms." "The reality," Samuel countered, "is that we have legal treaties guaranteeing our sovereignty. Those treaties were signed by your government. Breaking them isn't negotiation, it's theft. Treaties can be renegotiated when circumstances change." Circumstances didn't change. Greedy men like Briggs decided they wanted our resources and manufactured a war to justify taking them. "Mauser," Whitmore's smile tightened. Colonel Briggs was a rogue actor. His actions don't reflect official policy. His actions were funded by official budgets and supported by official personnel. The only thing rogue about him was getting caught. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Perhaps we could discuss compensation for the attack on the winter camp. The territory is prepared to offer reparations for the families affected." "How much is a grandmother worth?" Kaya asked, her voice sharp as broken glass. "What's the going rate for a child who burned to death in their shelter?" The lawyer fumbled with his papers. "We're prepared to offer $500 per confirmed casualty." The number hung in the air like something obscene. Cole did the math quickly. 23 dead meant $11,500. Barely enough to rebuild the structures that had burned, let alone compensate for the lives lost. "That's insulting," Cole said. Whitmore turned to him. "Deputy, with all respect, this doesn't concern you." "It concerns me plenty. You're trying to buy off a massacre with pocket change and call it justice. We're offering what the territorial budget allows. If you think you can negotiate better terms, you're welcome to try." Cole pulled out the folder he'd prepared, documents Milliken had helped him gather over the past week. "How about this? The territory acknowledges wrongdoing, issues a formal apology, and commits to permanent protection of the existing tribal boundaries. No further settlement on treaty lands without explicit consent. You also fund the rebuilding of the winter camp and provide medical care for the wounded. And you pay actual reparations, not $500 per death, but $5,000. That's over $100,000. That's what accountability costs." Whitmore laughed. "The legislature will never approve that. Then I guess Milliken runs another story about how the territory values tribal lives at $500 each. See how that plays in newspapers across the country." Cole leaned forward. You're here because the governor is terrified of public opinion. You think people won't care about you shortchanging massacre survivors? The negotiator's smile had completely disappeared. You're overplaying your hand, deputy. Maybe, but I'm also right, and you know it. The room fell silent except for the scratch of the stenographer's pen. Finally, the lawyer spoke up. We'll need to consult with our superiors. Can we adjourn until tomorrow? Samuel nodded. We'll be here. After the territorial representatives left, Samuel turned to Cole. That was risky. You may have just blown up the entire negotiation. Or I established that you won't accept being cheated. Either way, they know you're serious now. Kaya was smiling. My father's right that it was risky, but I liked watching Whitmore's face when you called out his numbers. They reconvened the next day, and Whitmore came back with a revised offer. $3,000 per casualty, formal acknowledgement of territorial failures that led to the attack, and a commitment to respect existing treaty boundaries. Not everything Cole had demanded, but closer. Samuel listened carefully, then made a counteroffer. $4,000 per casualty, plus funding for a tribal liaison office in Tucson to ensure future complaints were heard and addressed. Protection guarantees for tribal lands, with violations subject to immediate federal review. They haggled for another 2 days, each side giving ground in measured increments. Cole found himself impressed by Samuel's negotiating skill. The man knew exactly when to push and when to accept a compromise, always keeping sight of what mattered most while letting lesser points slide. In the end, they settled on terms that nobody loved but everyone could live with. $4,000 per casualty, formal territorial acknowledgement of wrongdoing, protection guarantees for treaty lands, and funding for both camp reconstruction and the liaison office. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was more than most tribes had ever gotten. The legislature still has to approve this, Whitmore warned as he signed the preliminary agreement. It's not final until they vote. Then I suggest you convince them to vote yes, Cole said. Because if this falls through, the alternative is Milliken running daily stories about broken promises until every reader in America knows your names. Whitmore packed up his papers without responding, his face tight with controlled anger. The territorial delegation left that afternoon, and Cole watched them go with a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. You made an enemy today, Samuel observed. I've been making enemies all month. What's one more? The trial of Colonel Marcus Briggs began 3 weeks later after the territorial judge finally arrived and assembled a jury. The prosecution called dozens of witnesses, soldiers who'd defected, townspeople who'd been threatened, and Kaya, who spent 2 days on the stand detailing everything she'd uncovered about the conspiracy. Briggs's lawyer was expensive and skilled, attacking the credibility of witnesses and arguing that his client had been operating on flawed intelligence, not orchestrating a criminal conspiracy. He painted Briggs as a dedicated soldier whose only crime was being too aggressive in protecting settlers from what he believed was a genuine threat. It was a good performance, and Cole could see some of the jurors wavering. Then the prosecution called Cole to the stand. The prosecutor was a sharp woman named Elizabeth Carson, sent from the territorial capital specifically for this case. She walked Cole through the events chronologically, finding Kaya in the desert, the pursuit, the weapons cache, the confrontation in Tucson. Then she asked the question she'd been building toward. Deputy Tanner, did Colonel Briggs ever acknowledge orchestrating the violence against tribal settlements? Not directly, but when I asked him if he'd sent raiders to my ranch 6 years ago, he said he'd sent raiders to a lot of ranches and didn't remember specifically which ones. And what did you take that to mean? That ordering raids was so routine for him, he couldn't even keep track of them all. Briggs's lawyer objected, but the judge allowed the testimony. The damage was done. The jury had just heard the colonel casually admit to years of criminal activity. The defense tried to recover by calling character witnesses, military officials who testified to Briggs's distinguished record and years of service. But Carson dismantled them one by one, showing how each had financial or political connections that benefited from Briggs's schemes. The deliberation took 6 hours. When the jury returned, their verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. Briggs stood as the judge read the sentence, death by hanging, to be carried out within 30 days. For the first time since Cole had known him, the colonel's careful control cracked. His face went white, and he had to grip the table to stay upright. This is a travesty, he managed. I served this country for 20 years. You served yourself, the judge said coldly, and you murdered innocent people for profit. The sentence stands. They led Briggs away in chains, and Cole watched him go without feeling the satisfaction he'd expected. Justice had been done, but it felt smaller than he'd imagined. All those deaths, all that suffering, and at the end of it, just one man going to the gallows. Outside the courthouse, Kaya was waiting. It's over. Is it? Briggs is convicted. The treaty protections are in place. The conspiracy's been exposed. She looked at him. What more were you expecting? I don't know. Something that felt more like closure, I guess. Closure's a myth. The best we get is moving forward. She paused. My father wants to meet with you. Says he has a proposal. They rode out to the winter camp, which had been largely rebuilt in the weeks since the attack. New shelters stood where the old ones had burned, and there was even a small school building under construction, one of the provisions from the treaty negotiations. Samuel was waiting in the central area, and with him was another man Cole didn't recognize. Younger, maybe 30, with the bearing of someone used to authority. Deputy Tanner, Samuel said, this is my nephew, James Running Bear. He'll be serving as the tribal liaison in Tucson, the position we negotiated. Cole shook James's hand. Good to meet you. It's important work. Which is why I wanted to discuss it with you, Samuel continued. The liaison office will handle complaints, treaty violations, conflicts between our people and settlers. It needs someone on the territorial side who understands both perspectives, who can be trusted to be fair. You want me to work with James? I want you to be his official counterpart, deputy sheriff assigned specifically to tribal affairs, answering to both Sheriff Dawson and to our council, a bridge between two worlds. Cole felt the weight of what was being offered. It meant choosing sides in a conflict that would probably never fully resolve. It meant making enemies of settlers who'd see him as a traitor and skeptics in the tribe who'd never fully trust a white lawman. It was a hard job with no good outcomes, just the constant work of preventing bad situations from becoming worse. When would I start? He asked. Samuel smiled. I'll take that as a yes. The transition took a month. Cole officially became deputy for tribal affairs, working out of a small office in Tucson that James shared with him. Their first cases were small, a disputed property line, accusations of cattle theft, a water rights argument that had been festering for years. Nothing dramatic, just the grinding daily work of preventing conflicts before they exploded. It was harder than fighting Briggs had been. Back then, the enemy was clear, and the solution was simple: expose him and stop him. This was murkier, requiring patience and compromise, and the understanding that sometimes the best outcome was nobody being completely satisfied. But it was also meaningful in a way Cole hadn't experienced in years. He was building something instead of just surviving, creating connections instead of hiding from them. One afternoon, 6 months after the trial, Cole was riding the boundary between tribal land and settler territory when he came across a young family, husband, wife, 2 small children, setting up camp on land that was technically inside the treaty boundaries. Folks, he said, reining in his horse, you know where you are? The husband stood, defensive. We've got a right to settle here. This is open territory. Actually, it's not. This is protected tribal land. You're about half a mile over the line. That's horseshit. The land agent in town said this area was available. Cole sighed. This was a common problem. Unscrupulous agents selling access to land they didn't control, pocketing fees and leaving families to face the consequences. What'd you pay him? $50 for the survey and claim filing. Then you got cheated. But that's not your kid's fault. Cole dismounted and pulled out the map he carried. Look, here's the actual boundary. You move your camp about a mile west, you'll be on legitimate open land. I'll even help you relocate if you need it. The wife spoke up for the first time. We spent everything we had getting here. If we can't settle, we've got nowhere to go. I'm not saying you can't settle, just that you need to move a little west first. The land there's just as good, and you won't be violating any treaties. The husband studied the map, then looked at his family, then back at Cole. You're not going to arrest us? For what? Being lied to by a crooked land agent? That's not a crime. Cole folded the map. But staying here after you've been told it's illegal, that becomes trespassing. So let's avoid that and get you situated properly. He spent the rest of the day helping them move their wagon and tent, then rode into town and filed a complaint against the land agent who'd cheated them. It was small work, unglamorous, the kind of thing that would never make the newspapers. But it mattered. One family steered right instead of wrong, one potential conflict avoided. Do that enough times, and maybe the territory became something better than what it had been. Cole stopped by Milliken's office on his way home. The newspaper man was at his desk, as always, surrounded by papers and ink. "Got something for you?" Cole said, tossing the complaint about the land agent onto the desk. "Might make a good story. Fraud, fake claims, families being cheated." Milliken scanned it quickly. "This is local crime, not exactly groundbreaking journalism." "No, but it's the truth. And you're in the truth business, aren't you?" "Fair point." Milliken set it aside. "I'll look into it. How's the liaison work going?" "Slowly. Lots of small problems, not many big solutions." Cole sat on the edge of the desk. "You ever wonder if we actually changed anything? With Briggs, the trial, all of it?" "Every day." Then I remember we're having this conversation in a town that isn't currently burning, discussing how to help people instead of how to fight wars. Milliken leaned back. "That's not nothing. Feels like not much sometimes. Change is slow. That's the part nobody tells you when you start trying to make the world better. You expect dramatic transformations, but what you get is incremental progress and lots of frustration." He smiled. "But incremental progress adds up. Ask me in 5 years whether it mattered." Cole left the office and walked through town as evening settled in. The streets were busy with normal life, merchants closing shops, families heading home, children playing in the last light of day. Peace was so ordinary, it was easy to forget how fragile it was, how quickly it could shatter if the wrong people pushed hard enough. He passed the boarding house where he'd been staying and kept walking toward the edge of town. His ranch was still out there, empty and waiting, but he hadn't been back in months. Couldn't quite face the ghosts yet, though he knew someday he'd have to. At the small cemetery on the hill, he found the graves he'd been avoiding. His wife. His sons. Simple markers with names and dates that said nothing about who they'd been or what they'd meant. Cole knelt in the dust and spoke to them for the first time since he'd buried them. "I know I haven't been here. Couldn't figure out what to say. Still can't, really." He pulled some weeds that had grown around the markers. "But I wanted you to know I'm trying. Trying to make this place better, so what happened to us doesn't keep happening to others. I don't know if it's working, but I'm trying." The wind stirred the grass, the only response he'd get. Cole sat there until full dark, then stood and walked back toward town. The cemetery hill gave him a view of Tucson spread below, lamps being lit in windows, smoke rising from chimneys. It looked peaceful. It looked like home. 3 weeks later, Kaya rode into town with news. The territorial legislature had voted to approve the treaty provisions and reparations. Everything they'd negotiated was now official. "Took them long enough," Cole said. "They dragged their feet hoping we'd give up or accept less. But my father doesn't give up, and neither do you." She dismounted and tied her horse outside the liaison office. "There's a ceremony being planned, formal signing of the agreement, representatives from the tribe and the territory. My father wants you there." "As what, decoration?" "As a witness. Someone who helped make it happen." She leaned against the hitching post. "You know, when I first met you, I thought you were just another broken man hiding in the desert. Turns out, I was wrong. I was broken. Still am in some ways. Maybe. But you're also building something that counts for more than being perfect." The ceremony took place a month later, on neutral ground between the winter camp and Tucson. They set up a large tent and assembled everyone involved: Samuel and the tribal council, the territorial representatives who'd negotiated the treaty, Sheriff Dawson, Milliken with his camera to document it, and Cole standing off to the side feeling distinctly out of place. Whitmore gave a speech about cooperation and mutual respect that managed to avoid mentioning Briggs or the attack or anything that had actually made the ceremony necessary. Samuel's response was more direct, thanking those who'd stood with his people and warning that the treaty's protections would be enforced. When the signing was done and photos taken, people began mingling in small groups. Cole found himself standing with James Running Bear, watching the two sides interact with careful politeness. "Think it'll last?" James asked. "The treaty or the peace?" "Both." Cole thought about that. The treaty will last as long as we enforce it. The peace will last as long as people on both sides choose to make it work. Neither one's guaranteed. That's not very optimistic. No, but it's honest. And honesty is a better foundation than optimism. As the afternoon wore on, Cole noticed a man lingering at the edge of the gathering. Older, weathered, with the look of someone who'd spent his life working the land. The man caught Cole's eye and nodded, a gesture of acknowledgement. Cole walked over. Something I can help you with? Name's Henry Larson. Got a ranch about 10 miles south of here. The man shifted his weight. I wanted to say thank you. For what? My daughter was one of the settlers who got caught in a raid 2 years back. Killed her husband, burned their farm. I spent all that time thinking it was tribal violence, hating every Indian I saw. Larson's voice was rough. Then your newspaper friend published the truth. Turns out it was Briggs's men dressed up to look like a raiding party, trying to stir up trouble. Cole didn't know what to say to that. I've been carrying that hate for 2 years, Larson continued, poisoning myself with it, pushing away anyone who tried to tell me different. Reading the truth didn't bring my son-in-law back, but it let me stop hating the wrong people. That's worth something. I'm sorry for your loss. So am I. But I'm also grateful the lying stopped before I did something stupid with my anger. Larson held out his hand. So thank you for caring enough to expose the truth, even when it was dangerous. They shook hands and Larson walked away. Cole stood there feeling the weight of that encounter, understanding in a way he hadn't before that what they'd done had rippled out in directions he'd never see. The ceremony wound down as sunset approached. People drifted toward their horses and wagons, already mentally moving on to whatever came next. Cole found Kaya standing alone, watching the western sky turn orange and red. What happens now? He asked. We go back to our lives. My father rebuilds the camp. I help run the liaison work with James. You keep being the law that actually enforces justice instead of just power. And if it falls apart? If the treaty gets violated or someone else like Briggs shows up? Then we fight again. But at least we'll know we can win. Cole looked at her. This woman who'd been through hell and come out the other side still believing in the possibility of something better. You ever think about what comes after the fighting, when there's actual peace? Sometimes, but I don't know if I'd recognize peace if it showed up. Been at war too long. Me too. They stood in comfortable silence as the sun dropped below the horizon and the first stars appeared. Cole thought about his wife and sons, about the ranch that waited empty, about all the years he'd spent just surviving. I'm going to sell the ranch, he said suddenly. Kaya looked at him. Why? Because it's not mine anymore. Hasn't been since the day they died. I've been holding on to it like that would somehow bring them back, but all it does is keep me tied to the worst day of my life. What will you do instead? Build something new. Maybe buy a place closer to town, somewhere I can actually live instead of just haunt. Or maybe just keep a room at the boarding house and focus on the work. He smiled slightly. Turns out I'm better at preventing tragedies than dwelling on them. That's growth. That's survival. But maybe they're the same thing. The gathering broke up fully as night settled in. Cole rode back to Tucson alongside James, discussing cases they needed to review and complaints that had come in. Normal work for normal days, the kind of thing that wouldn't make anyone's story but mattered just the same. A week later, Cole finalized the sale of his ranch to a young family from Missouri, people who needed the land more than he did. He took the money and put most of it toward funding the tribal liaison office, figuring it was better used preventing conflicts than sitting in a bank. With what remained, he bought a small house on the edge of Tucson. Nothing fancy, just 2 rooms and a porch where he could sit in the evenings. It was the first place he'd owned that didn't carry the weight of memories he couldn't escape. The first night in the new house, he sat on that porch and watched the stars come out. Somewhere in the mountains, Kaya and her people were rebuilding their lives. Somewhere in a cell, Briggs was waiting for the executioner. And somewhere in between, the territory was slowly, imperfectly, becoming something better than what it had been. Cole pulled out the badge Dawson had given him months ago, the silver worn smooth by his habit of rubbing it when he was thinking. Deputy for Tribal Affairs. It wasn't the life he'd planned, wasn't the future he'd imagined when he was younger and thought he understood how the world worked, but it was a life that mattered, that helped people, that built something instead of just tearing down. He pinned the badge back on his vest and went inside, leaving the door unlocked. For the first time in 6 years, he didn't feel the need to barricade himself against the world. The ghosts that had haunted him were still there. They'd always be there. But they weren't the only thing defining him anymore. Months passed into a rhythm of work and small victories. Cole and James handled dozens of cases, most of them minor, but all of them important to the people involved. A few times, situations escalated and required harder choices, but they managed to diffuse most conflicts before they turned violent. The hanging of Colonel Briggs took place on a gray morning in November, witnessed by officials and documented by Milliken for the historical record. Cole didn't attend. He'd stopped needing to see the man die to know justice had been done. What mattered more was the work that came after, ensuring the treaty held, that protection stayed in place, that the lies Briggs had told didn't get retold by the next ambitious man looking for easy wealth. It was exhausting work, often thankless, the kind that wore you down in small increments rather than dramatic confrontations. But Cole found he preferred it to the alternative. Drama was for people who needed excitement to feel alive. He just needed to feel useful. One evening, Sheriff Dawson invited Cole to dinner at his house, a rare occurrence that suggested something more than casual socializing. When Cole arrived, he found Dawson sitting on his porch with a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. "Sit," the sheriff said. "We need to talk." Cole sat, accepting the glass Dawson poured. "That sounds ominous." "Not ominous, just important." Dawson took a drink. "I'm retiring at the end of the year. Been lawman for 23 years, and my back's telling me it's time to quit." "You've earned the rest." "Maybe, but it means the town needs a new sheriff." Dawson looked at him directly. "I'm recommending you for the position." Cole nearly choked on his whiskey. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious. You've proven yourself over the past year. Fair, competent, brave when it matters. That's what the job needs." "I've been a deputy for less than a year. There are men with decades of experience who are either corrupt, incompetent, or both. This territory's changing, Cole. It needs leaders who understand that justice means more than just enforcing whoever's got the most power." Dawson refilled their glasses. "I think you're that kind of leader. Question is whether you believe it." Cole sat back, feeling the weight of what was being offered. Sheriff meant responsibility for the whole territory, not just tribal affairs. It meant politics and compromise and dealing with exactly the kind of men he'd spent the last year opposing. It also meant having the authority to actually change things instead of just working around the edges. "Let me think about it," he said finally. "Take your time, but not too much time. The town council votes in 6 weeks." Cole spent those weeks wrestling with the decision, talking it through with James and Kaya, and even Milliken, who seemed amused by the whole situation. "From fugitive to sheriff in under a year," the newspaper man said. "That's quite a trajectory. I'm not sure I'm qualified." "Nobody's qualified until they do the job and figure it out. That's how life works." Milliken leaned back in his chair. "The question isn't whether you're qualified. It's whether you're willing to keep fighting for what you started." In the end, that was what decided it. Cole accepted the nomination, and despite some opposition from people who thought he was too sympathetic to tribal interests, the town council confirmed him as sheriff by a narrow margin. He took the oath in a small ceremony, pinning on the sheriff's star and feeling the weight of it settle into place alongside the deputy badge he'd worn for months. "You can only wear one badge," Dawson pointed out with a smile. "Then I'll wear the sheriff's star and keep the deputy badge in my pocket. Reminder of where I started." The transition was bumpy. Some of the old deputies resented taking orders from someone who'd been an outsider until recently. A few resigned rather than work for him. But others stayed and new blood came in. Younger men who'd grown up seeing the territory torn apart and wanted to build something better. Cole kept James as his official liaison to the tribal council, maintained the office they'd built, and made it clear that treaty enforcement would be a priority. It cost him politically, but he'd stopped caring about political costs somewhere around the time he'd decided dying for something was better than living for nothing. The first year was the hardest. Every decision scrutinized, every mistake magnified, every compromise criticized by people who wanted simpler answers than reality could provide. Cole made mistakes. Hired the wrong person once, misjudged a situation that nearly turned violent, let his anger get the better of him when dealing with a particularly corrupt land speculator. But he also got things right more often than wrong, prevented conflicts, enforced the law fairly, built relationships between communities that had been at war. Slowly, grudgingly, even his critics had to admit he was doing the job. 2 years into his tenure as sheriff, Kaya rode into town with news that her father was ill. Samuel had been declining for months, age and old injuries finally catching up with him. The tribal council was already discussing succession, and Kaya's name kept coming up. "I don't want it," she told Cole over coffee in his office. "I'm good at fighting, at gathering intelligence, at exposing corruption. I'm not a leader." "Your father was good at fighting too, before he became a leader." Maybe that's exactly what leadership needs right now. Someone who knows how to fight, but chooses something else. That's easy for you to say. You chose to be sheriff. After spending 6 years hiding from the world and doing nothing that mattered, sometimes the right choice is the hard one. Kaya was quiet for a long moment. "If I do this, I need to know I can count on you. That the partnership we've built won't disappear when my father's gone. You have my word, and my word's the only thing I've got that's worth a damn." Samuel Nara passed away 3 months later, surrounded by his people and at peace with what he'd accomplished. The funeral was a mix of traditional ceremonies and newer influences, a reflection of the man who'd spent his life bridging two worlds. Kaya was chosen as the new leader by unanimous vote of the council, and she approached the role with the same fierce intelligence she'd brought to everything else. She and Cole continued the work they'd started, expanding it to include education initiatives and economic development programs that gave tribal members more options than subsistence living. It wasn't perfect. There were still conflicts, still people on both sides who wanted war instead of peace, still corrupt officials trying to cheat the system. But the trajectory had changed. The territory was building something instead of just tearing itself apart. 5 years after Cole first pinned on the deputy badge, he found himself standing on the same hill where he'd buried his family, looking down at Tucson spread below. The town had grown, new buildings going up, new families arriving, the kind of growth that came from stability instead of chaos. He'd never stopped missing his wife and sons, never stopped wishing he could have saved them. But he'd learned to carry that grief without letting it define everything else about him. "Thought I'd find you here." Kaya rode up the hill and dismounted, coming to stand beside him. "You do this every year. Anniversary of the day they died. Figured they deserved to be remembered. They'd be proud of what you've become. Maybe. Or maybe they'd think I should have been this person all along before it took losing them to wake me up. You can't change the past, Cole. None of us can. We just get to choose what we do with the time we have left." They stood together in silence, watching the sun drop toward the horizon. Below, lamps were being lit in windows, families gathering for dinner, children playing in the streets. Normal life in a place that had earned its peace through hard work and harder choices. "You ever think about what Briggs said?" Cole asked. "About how someone else would just take his place, that we couldn't really change anything." "Sometimes. Then I remember he's dead and we're still here doing the work. Turns out that matters more than his predictions." Cole smiled. "Yeah, I guess it does." The desert wind picked up, carrying the smell of creosote and rain from distant storms. Tomorrow would bring new problems, new conflicts, new choices between easy answers and right ones. But tonight, the world felt almost peaceful. They rode back to town together as darkness fell, two people who'd survived hell and come out the other side still believing that broken things could be mended, that justice could be more than just a word, that the future didn't have to look like the past. It wasn't the ending Cole had imagined when he'd first cut Kaya down from that wooden frame in the desert, but it was the ending they'd earned, imperfect and hard-won and real. And in a territory that had seen too much death and too many lies, that felt like enough. The badge on his chest caught the lamplight as they entered town, silver worn smooth but still holding its shine. Sheriff. The word meant responsibility, meant choosing to stand between order and chaos every single day. It meant carrying the weight of other people's hopes and fears and anger. But it also meant building something that lasted beyond one man's lifetime. It meant creating space for people to live without constant fear. It meant proving that power didn't have to corrupt, that authority could serve justice instead of just itself. Cole had spent 6 years learning that lesson the hard way. Now he got to spend the rest of his life teaching it to others, one decision at a time, one conflict resolved, one bridge built between people who thought they had to be enemies. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was the life that mattered. And sometimes that was the same thing as the life you were meant to live.